Chapter 1961. A moment later, he looked up at her seriously. "Are you afraid of me?" She didn't understand what he was saying. She had been afraid of him for a long time. Why was he asking this now? The look in his eyes deepened. He reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Then, her face turned red. She struggled but couldn't break free. It was as if he was rubbing against her on purpose, making her heart tremble. "I'm afraid." Her voice was trembling, and there was a hint of pleading in it. "Let me down." After all, she was still young, and he couldn't bear to let her know more about the viciousness of men. He put her down and picked up the sketch again. "Since you're afraid, how dare you provoke me like this? HM?" She lowered her head, and her long hair fell on her shoulders. Kneeling, she said softly, "I won't dare to do it again." He glanced at her and suddenly pulled her into his embrace again. This time, he didn't do anything rash. Instead, he just held her in his arms. His good-looking chin rested on the top of her head as he said hoarsely, "Shinshin, we'll get married in the future. Get used to it. Also, I'll get someone to take a photo of us when we get married, okay?" Take a photo? Maybe a wedding photo? Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at him. He smiled faintly and kissed her forehead. "Take a photo and put it in the master bedroom." Photo naked? She was embarrassed and angry, but she didn't dare to refute him unless she wanted to be naked right now. Feeling that it was about time, Yumin gave her a goodnight kiss and got up to put on his bathrobe. Before leaving the bedroom, he looked at her and said calmly, "I'm going on a business trip for half a month. Be good during this time. Get Uncle Zhao to send you to school and after school too. Don't turn off your phone. I'll call you early in the morning. Call me at noon and tell me what you had for lunch. Also, get Sisterly to tell me before 6:30 p.m. I'll call you at 9 o'clock p.m. Understand?" He said a bunch of things and she was stunned. Actually, she was already used to it. He had been controlling her like this since he was 18, even when her parents were at home. No one had ever accused him of behaving like this. Just like it was his good to her, his control over her, everything was natural. Her surname was Tang, and his surname was Yi. But ever since he came to the Tang family at the age of 10, she seemed to have followed his surname. She lowered her head and nodded as usual. "Yes." He looked at her, his eyes deep and serene. Finally, for some reason, he sighed. When the door closed, she finally relaxed and lay on the bed. This kind of love was what many girls dreamed of, but she felt a little suffocated. His love, sometimes, was like a cage. She couldn't breathe inside. Even so, she was unable to resist. She had never dared to defy his forcefulness. It was as if he wanted to kiss her and forcefully remove her clothes. If he wanted to kiss her there, she didn't dare to say no. He knew that he shouldn't have done that. It was wrong of him to do that. Cher closed her eyes. She couldn't tell if she was enduring it because she really liked him or if she was afraid of him. But anyway, he would be on a business trip for half a month. Although he would check on her before breakfast, at least she wouldn't have to face him at night. Recently, he seemed to like hugging her, and his actions were getting more and more intimate. Chapter 1962. Yimuyun's flight was at 10 in the morning, so he sent her to school at 8:30. The white Ferrari came to a stop. She quietly unbuckled her seatbelt and prepared to get out of the car. "I'm going on a business trip. Is there anything you want to say?" His voice was a little hoarse as he grabbed onto her slender wrist forcefully. Cher looked up into his eyes and said obediently, "Goodbye, big brother." "That's not what I wanted to hear." His voice was a little stiff, and he did not intend to let go of her. She bit her lower lip and pouted her pretty little mouth, looking a little dissatisfied. But very quickly, she leaned over and hugged his neck tenderly. She buried her warm face into his neck and said softly, "I'll miss Big Brother."
She did not know why.
They were clearly in a relationship, but she kept calling him Big Brother. Given his personality, he would definitely be unhappy. However, he didn't. He had always let her call him like this, and he had never been unhappy. How could the little girl know the dark thoughts in this bad man's heart? Every time she called him brother, the evil fire in his heart would be satisfied. So much, so that on their wedding night, who knows how he would bully this little sister of his. Because she was obedient, his face finally looked a little better. Lowering his head, he found her soft lips and kissed her deeply for a long time before letting go of her. Perhaps because he was going to be away for half a month, she was unusually obedient. When he kissed her, she even responded a little and clung onto him timidly. His heart was stirred. He would not have let her go so easily, but the flight time was already set. Raising his hand to look at his watch, he let her go in the end. Patting her little butt, he said in a husky voice, "All right, hurry and go in. Wait for Uncle Zhao after school, HM?" She nodded her head obediently. Her fair face looked a little intoxicated from the kiss. He could not help but reach out and caress her red lips, his eyes darkening. After she got out of the car, he smoked half a cigarette before starting the car and leaving. As the car drove away, a slightly plump figure stood at the side, looking a little dazed. She had seen Tang Cher run out of the car. When she got off, her red lips were slightly swollen, and her hair was messy. Although Zheng Xinyi was young, she could tell what was going on with Tang Xue'er's appearance. Yesterday, she heard that the young man in the car was Tang Cher's brother. Would a brother kiss his sister like that? Would he put his sister on his lap? Would he hug her so tightly and kiss her with his tongue? No, that can't be her brother. It can only be her boyfriend, the boyfriend who drives a Ferrari. Zheng Xinyi clenched her fists. It turned out that Tang Cher already had such a good boyfriend. She walked briskly into the campus and caught up with Tang Cher. "Cher, I saw you get off the car at the entrance." Cher looked sideways. To be honest, her relationship with Zheng Xinyi wasn't bad, but they weren't that close either. She had begged Yi Muyun not because she was close to Zheng Xinyi, but because she didn't want to take up someone else's position. She knew that if Yi Muyun were to find out about her thoughts, he would definitely make fun of her. Other than being the last place, she would be taking up someone else's position. Chapter 1963. Cher replied, "My brother gave it to me." Zheng Xinyi bit her lower lip. "I went to the student union yesterday. Zhou Chengguang also said that your brother came to pick you up yesterday." Zhou Chengguang? Xue'er recalled that he was the senior who had picked up her sketch yesterday. She had an impression that because of him, she had been ruthlessly bullied by Yi Muyun for an entire night. She replied absent-mindedly, "I think so. Cher, don't you think that Zhou Chengguang is very handsome and good-looking?" Zheng Xinyi asked hesitantly. Cher was still absent-minded.
"He's all right."
She had been used to seeing good-looking men since she was young. Her dad and Uncle Qin were still the devil, especially when she was hugged by a man who was so handsome that it made her hair stand on end. It was hard for her to notice whether other men were handsome or not. It should be, because no matter how handsome they were, they would not be as handsome as Yi Muyun. Zheng Xinyi heaved a sigh of relief and looked relaxed. "Oh right, Cher, I've joined the student union as the commissary in charge of studies." She paused and blushed. Zhou Chengguang used to be the commissary in charge of studies. "Congratulations." Cher stood still and said sincerely. Zheng Xinyi smiled.
"Thank you."
"Oh right, are you joining the club?" Cher shook her head. "I have to go home after school." "Your boyfriend picks you up?" Zheng Xinyi hesitated for a moment and asked. Cher did not deny it. "Yeah, he's quite strict." She smiled weakly because Zheng Xinyi kept bringing the topic to Yi Muyun. It was obvious that Zheng Xinyi knew something. She did not want to hide it because she felt that she could only be with Yi Muyun in this lifetime. So it did not matter what other people knew or thought. But she did not want to say too much. Zheng Xinyi was relieved. He really was her boyfriend. As they spoke, they arrived at the classroom.
It was art history.
To her surprise, she saw Zhou Chengguang. Pursing her lips, she walked to the last row and sat down. Her arrival attracted everyone's attention. She was the campus belle. It was truly beautiful. It was the kind of beauty that was well protected, like a flower in a greenhouse. Her expression was filled with the tenderness of a young girl. It was enough to make all men want to protect her in their arms. So did Zhou Chengguang. For 20 years, he had never fallen in love with any girl, especially when all the boys in the school were infatuated with the former campus belle. He even felt that they were superficial and lustful and only looked at the surface. But now he felt that he was wrong. It wasn't that he wasn't lustful, but that he hadn't encountered a stunning appearance. Now he would rather be a shallow man. Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Zhou Chengguang stood up, picked up his things, and walked straight to the last row. Standing beside her, he leaned forward slightly and said with a voice as gentle as jade, "Go in and find a seat." Cher raised her eyes in surprise and looked at the young man in front of her. Zhou Chengguang? She remembered that someone said last time that he majored in piano. Why did he come to study art history? But the classroom was not her home, so she still moved 4 seats in. That way, she didn't have to sit next to him. Zhou Chengguang's lips curled into a faint smile. His long legs strode over, and he sat down beside her. The little girl frowned, looked at him, and didn't say anything. "I heard that you have this class, so I came." His voice was a little low as he looked at her delicate face. To be honest, he was a very good-looking man. He was the most handsome man in the school. Chapter 1964. Zhou Chengguang was very clear about his life. Tang's share was an accident in his life. A beautiful accident. He didn't reject such an accident at all. Instead, he was happy. Of course, he didn't mind her lack of ambition. Girls had always been pampered. With her delicate skin and tender flesh, one could tell at a glance how pampered she was. Zhou Chengguang thought that she could do whatever she wanted to do, such as painting. Zhou Chengguang sighed in his heart. He had never liked anyone, and he had never thought that any girl was important to him. But from the moment he saw her, he thought about how he should dote on her. He even thought that she would be a lovely wife in the future. He would imagine that one afternoon after their wedding, he would return home from outside, and she would be sleeping lazily in the sunroom. He would wake her up with a kiss and tell her that he would be attending a concert that night. She would bury her little face into the pure white pillow, and after a while, she would get up and hug him, whispering in his ear, "Chengguang, I'm pregnant. What should I do?" What could he do? Then he would dote on her twice as much, dote on the little life that was about to be born. Really, Zhou Chengguang was an excellent pianist. No one doubted that he would be famous in the future. Only his teacher had once said to him with concern, "Chengguang, your skills have already surpassed the top pianists, but your works are lacking in richness." He didn't understand what was missing. Later, his teacher patted him on the shoulder and smiled. "Go and have a relationship. Go and find the feeling of love." Zhou Chengguang liked Tang's share, not because he wanted to find the feeling, but because he had feelings for her. He remembered the first time he saw her. She was sleeping in the classroom. The warm sunlight shone on the side of her face. It was so bright that he could see the fine hairs on her fair cheeks. If it wasn't for the fact that she was drooling, that beautiful scene would have been like a peaceful painting. At that moment, Zhou Chengguang heard his heart skip a beat. He heard a voice from the depths of his soul. "Zhou Chengguang, it's her." That day, she slept for the entire class, and he watched her for the entire class, mesmerized. From then on, they had a lifelong misunderstanding. At this moment, he said to her, "Because you came, I came." It was almost like a confession, but Cher didn't hear it. She only looked at him blankly, muttered an "oh," then took out a piece of paper and started scribbling on it. She didn't pay him any more attention. Or rather, from the beginning to the end, she had ignored him. It was because of his passion. Since the teacher was in class, Zhou Chengguang didn't need to listen to the history of art. All his attention was focused on the young girl. She was still lying on her stomach, and her body was half turned. He could see her thin white ears, and there was a layer of fine fur on them, soft and cute like a small animal. After looking at it for a long time, she finished painting. He saw that it was still her brother. To be honest, he was definitely a very beautiful man with a stunning appearance. His facial features were beautiful and exquisite, but they didn't give off a sense of femininity. On the contrary, he was very cold. Although he was young, there was a depth between his brows that Zhou Chengguang couldn't see through. When Zhou Chengguang saw her putting the painting in the album, he asked softly, "Is your brother working?" Cher turned her head and looked at Zhou Chengguang's face, replying distractedly. Chapter 1965. If Cher wanted to leave, she would have to pass by Zhou Chengguang. If he didn't leave, she wouldn't be able to either. The classroom, which had been rather noisy at the end of class, quietened down as everyone looked at them. Zhou Chengguang sighed. He had initially thought that he came to the art history class on a whim. But now, even a fool could tell who he was here for. Of course, Tang Cher was the only one who didn't know. In her world, when it came to relationships and the love between a man and a woman, she would never associate it with anyone other than Yi Muyun. She stood there and looked at Zhou Chengguang in confusion. "You're blocking my way?" Her tone was matter-of-fact. She didn't feel like she was talking to the school's Prince Charming. Zhou Chengguang pursed his lips and smiled. "Where are you going? I'll give you a lift." He paused and said, "I have a bike." Cher said slowly, "I have legs." With that, she pushed Zhou Chengguang aside and walked towards the classroom door. Tang Cher had always been a gentle person. Other than her beauty, she didn't have much of a personality. But just now, she pushed Zhou Chengguang away, the most handsome man in B University and also the president of B University's student society. All the women were indignant. Why did she do that? But Cher didn't care about those jealous gazes. She walked out slowly. When she reached the door, Zhang Xini caught up with her. Cher turned around and looked at her. She was a little puzzled. "Why are you in class too?" Zhang Xini walked in a hurry. Her face was a little red, and she was panting. It was a last-minute decision. Cher smiled faintly and walked towards the classroom. Zhang Xini hesitated. "I saw that you rejected Zhou Chengguang."
Rejected?
Cher laughed.
I didn't.
There was nothing going on between her and Zhou Chengguang. Why would she reject him? Zhang Xini was stunned for a moment. Then she asked cautiously, "Cher, don't you have a boyfriend?" Cher paused. "Yeah, but does this have anything to do with Zhou Chengguang?" Zhang Xini finally understood that Tang Cher did not pay attention to Zhou Chengguang at all. There seemed to be a natural layer of protection around her, blocking out everyone. Rather than saying that she lived like a princess, in fact, in a sense, she was isolated from the world, even though she came to class every day. Her life, only allowed her brother to exist. That was a kind of domineering love. Perhaps only someone who had raised him from a young age could be so familiar with him. Zhang Xini thought for a moment. "So you really don't like Zhou Chengguang? Why should I like him?" Cher looked at her strangely, walked into the classroom, and sat down. Zhang Xini's heart felt cold. Why should she like him? Because Zhou Chengguang was handsome and played the piano well. Behind his back, everyone said that Zhou Chengguang was the piano prince. But Tang Cher did not know anything. She did not even know that Zhou Chengguang liked her. This kind of natural adorableness was very infuriating. Zhang Xini pursed her lips and followed her in. For the whole day, she gave up her favorite study to observe Tang Cher. Girls from rich families were not interested in books at all. Other than sleeping in class, they did nothing but write and draw. Zhang Xini looked at her and felt a little annoyed. Why could some people live like riceworms? She could not understand it, let alone understand it. After class, she remembered that she had to go to the student union tonight. She had just been elected as the president of the study committee. Chapter 1966. But tonight, Zhou Chengguang would not be at the student union. He would probably be playing basketball. Therefore, Zhang Xini thought that if she walked around the basketball court when she went to the student union, Zhou Chengguang would probably recognize her. When Cher was about to go back, Zhang Xini tugged at her sleeve. "I'll go with you." They would pass by the basketball court when they left the school. Cher had no objections. She carried her backpack and walked slowly. Zhang Xini stopped a few times to wait for her. She did not look impatient and was always approachable. Because she was the class monitor, she felt that she should be more patient with a problematic student like Cher. When they reached the basketball court, Zhang Xini was not as calm. She looked inside and saw the boys playing basketball. There were many people, but she could see Zhou Chengguang at a glance. She pursed her lips and stayed there for a while longer. Zhou Chengguang was wearing a blue and white basketball uniform. He was tall and muscular, and there were beads of sweat on his youthful face. Zheng Xinyi stopped and pulled Snow to her side. "Let's stay here and watch for a while." Cher wanted to reject her, but Zheng Xinyi was strong and pulled her to sit down. Cher wanted to say something, but Zheng Xinyi said excitedly, "Look, Zhou Chengguang scored with a dunk." Another three-pointer. Zheng Xinyi's face was filled with excitement. She was not her usual self. Usually, she was a boring person. Snow tilted her head and looked at Yi Muyun's excited expression.
She thought back to the past.
It should have been a few years ago. At that time, she was around 12 or 13 years old. Yi Muyun would also bring her along to play basketball. They grew up together like conjoined twins. 2 years ago, when he came of age, he stopped bringing her everywhere. Other than work, she was the only thing in his life. Her world was filled with him, but she knew nothing about his world. Of course, she wasn't too interested in finding out. Just as she was lost in thought, she heard Zheng Xinyi exclaim. Cher vaguely wondered if Zhou Chengguang had scored again. Just as she was thinking about it, she felt a sharp pain on her forehead. The basketball had actually hit her head. "It hurts." She was in so much pain that her tears fell, and her head was a little dizzy. She covered her forehead with her hand and felt a touch of warmth. He took it down and saw that it was dark red blood. Tang Cher had been pampered since she was young, so she had never seen blood before. She stared blankly, wondering if she was going to die. Zheng Xinyi's voice sounded from the side. "You're bleeding. Lie flat quickly. I'll get someone to carry you to the infirmary." She was also scared out of her wits. She was the one who dragged Tang Cher here to watch the game. Tang Cher's family was so prominent. If something happened to her, she would not have a good ending. Hence, she opened her mouth and looked around frantically, trying to find someone to help. Zhou Chengguang flipped out of the court and quickly half-knelt in front of Cher. He asked Zheng Xinyi, "Did she faint?" At that moment, the girl who had her eyes closed stretched out her tiny hand and waved it gently. Her voice was weak and uncomfortable. "No, but..." There was no but. This time, she fainted directly. Zhou Chengguang carried her up and sprinted towards the infirmary. Zheng Xinyi was stunned for a moment before she hurriedly followed. Chapter 1967. He was in too much of a hurry just now, so he did not feel the ecstasy when she was in his arms. He only felt that she was so light and soft, like a ball of cotton. The school doctor looked at the wound and frowned. "The blow is a bit heavy. If she fainted like that, she might have a concussion. Push her over and take an X-ray. She has to stay for further observation." The university's infirmary was quite well equipped with all kinds of examination equipment. The school doctor's skills were not bad either. Zhou Chengguang nodded and carefully pushed her to the X-ray room. After that, he pushed her back to the examination room to wait for the results of the X-ray. Zhou Chengguang stood beside the small bed the whole time, while Zheng Xinyi stood a little behind him without making a sound. Half an hour later, she came out with a slight concussion. The school doctor looked at Zhou Chengguang and said tactfully, "Let classmate Tang's family take care of her." It was not suitable for a man and a woman to be together. Zheng Xinyi hurriedly said, "I'll stay." She finally looked at Zhou Chengguang openly. "Go do what you need to do." The moment she said that, she felt even sweeter. Finally, she closed the distance between them. Zhou Chengguang still looked at the little girl lying on the bed quietly and said softly, "I'll stay until her family comes." Zheng Xinyi was stunned and did not know what to say. After a long time, she said dryly, "I'll wait too." Zhou Chengguang did not say anything and turned to leave. Zheng Xinyi thought that he was going to leave and hurriedly chased after him. Zhou Chengguang turned his head and said calmly, "I'll go buy a towel." Zheng Xinyi wanted to say something, but her lips moved and she still could not say anything. She slowly turned around and went to the examination room. Standing there, she looked at Cher's pale face and said softly, "Look, he likes you very much. Aren't you touched at all?" But the unconscious person could not answer her, so Cher just lay there quietly. Zheng Xini softly spat out these 3 words, her eyes dark and gloomy. At this time, Zhou Chengguang came back with a brand new towel in his hand. It was pink. "Let me do it," Zheng Xini stuttered. Zhou Chengguang stopped in his tracks and said lightly, "Leave first." Zheng Xini was very disappointed. She forced a smile and said, "Then I'll go to the student union first." She waited for a while, but Zhou Chengguang did not answer her. Only then did she give up and leave. Walking outside, his heart felt empty. She didn't believe that he couldn't tell that she liked him, but he couldn't even be bothered to reject her. This was a deep disregard. After Zheng Xini left, Zhou Chengguang washed the towel with hot water, walked back to the small bed, sat down, and gently wiped Cher's face. That small face was so exquisite that it surpassed all of his imaginations of beauty. He looked at her in a daze, until her cell phone rang in her backpack. Zhou Chengguang's fingers reached over and took out the cell phone from her bag. The caller ID read, "Devil King." He smiled faintly and looked at the unconscious young girl before picking up the phone. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other side of the phone for a few seconds before a cold voice said, "Who are you?" It was a voice filled with hostility. Zhou Chengguang immediately thought of a handsome face. It should be Tang Cher's brother. That domineering young man who seemed to have a crush on a girl at a glance. Clearing his throat, Zhou Chengguang said in a low voice, "I'm her schoolmate. She got hit by a basketball in school." Chapter 1968. Zhou Chengguang was used to being fawned upon. He had never been so completely ignored and treated with hostility. But who asked him to like someone else's sister? Thus, he remained polite. "She's temporarily unconscious and is in the school infirmary. We've checked her. She has a slight concussion." He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but there was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then, the phone was hung up as expected. Zhou Chengguang looked at the black screen with an ugly expression. But in less than half an hour, there was a commotion at the entrance of the infirmary. The sound of hurried footsteps could be heard. The school's leader and the head of the infirmary appeared together. Of course, there was also a respectable middle-aged man. Meng Qingqing stepped forward and reached out to pinch Cher's little face. He had wanted to pinch her a long time ago, but never had the chance. Today, he finally got the chance. He carried her horizontally and walked straight outside. Zhou Chengguang instinctively stopped him. "Who are you people?" Meng Qingqing tilted his head and looked at the hairless young man, his voice faint. "I'm her uncle. Now, take her to the hospital for a full body checkup." Then he asked with a faint smile, "You like Xiaoxin?" Zhou Chengguang didn't speak, which was a tacit agreement. But now he knew that she had such a cute name. Xiaoxin, would she grow up to be a sweetheart? Meng Qingqing's lips curled into a meaningful smile. "You'd better stop it immediately." While Zhou Chengguang was still in a daze, Meng Qingqing had already carried the little girl to the limousine outside the infirmary. The limousine glowed in the dark night. The driver opened the door to let Mr. Meng in. Zhou Chengguang stood there and watched quietly. He was in no position to stop them. He came from a good family, so he could naturally tell that the car was expensive. The more he thought about the man just now, the more he found him familiar. At this moment, he remembered that he was the vice president of Boyi, Meng Qingqing. He was also an influential figure in B City. For the past few years, Meng Qingqing had been the one in charge of the Boyi group. The CEO, Tang Yu, did not really manage the business and brought his wife around the world to play. Zhou Chengguang was not interested in the business world, but he still knew a little about it. If Meng Qingqing was ranked second in Boyi, then the next person in line would be a young man named Yi Muyun, a genius in the business world. He disdained the elites of the business world. Zhou Chengguang looked at her and knew her identity. It was easy to like her, but how easy was it to get her? A family like Tang Shue's would definitely have strict requirements for her future husband. If Zhou Chengguang knew that he had lost only in time, he would probably vomit blood. When Yi Muyun looked for Tang Yu, it was actually very simple. He was willing to take care of Xiaoxin, and Tang Yu had more time to accompany his wife. It was as simple as that. Zhou Chengguang wanted to go forward, but was stopped by two bodyguards. Sorry, our young master does not like people to be too close to Mississippi at this moment. The Lincoln limousine had already sped away. Zhou Chengguang looked at it, his gaze a little distant. Young master? Was it her brother? That man who looked very cold? In the Lincoln limousine, Meng Qingcheng held Xiaoxin in one hand and answered Yi Muyun's call with the other. He knew that Yi Muyun was in a meeting at this time, so he took the time to make this call. The car is on the way, it should be fine. Meng Qingcheng's voice was gentle. Muyun, I am here, don't worry. Yi Muyun's voice was a little tense. I will come back after the meeting. Chapter 1969. Probably because time was really tight, Yi Muyun hung up the phone before Meng Qingcheng could finish his words. Meng Qingcheng's voice floated and sounded a little weak. Don't you think you're watching her too closely? But no one could answer him. He sighed and said to the driver, drive slowly, Cher will be fine. The Lincoln limousine drove to Xingyuan Hospital. It was supposed to be after work, but since the CEO's daughter came, it became unusually busy. Blood was drawn, CT scan, and ultrasonography were done. Meng Qingcheng accompanied her throughout the whole process. Such a big scene also alarmed Tang Yu, who was far away in a foreign country. Tang Yu personally called to ask about the situation. When Meng Qingcheng told him that it was just a slight concussion, Tang Yu frowned and said with some concern, I heard that even the ultrasonography was done? That basketball hit the head. What did it have to do with the stomach? Meng Qingcheng held back his laughter and said after a while, it was Mu Yun's insistence and arrangement. It was probably an early premarital checkup. Meng Qingcheng thought immorally and somewhat sympathized with Tang Yu. Tang Yu sighed softly. Meng Qingcheng and he had been friends for a long time, so there was nothing to hide. He sat on the bench in the aisle smoking and smiled. You really don't care about the two little ones and let Mu Yun do whatever he wants. He reminded again, I'm afraid of Mu Yun's possessiveness. It's much more powerful than what you did to Chi-Chi in the past. Tang Yu let out a long sigh and suddenly asked Meng Qingcheng, Qingcheng, do you think Xiaoxin likes Mu Yun? Meng Qingcheng couldn't say it and was silent for a moment. Tang Yu continued and sighed. If she doesn't like him, do you think she will let him care about her? How could she be willing to leave her whole world to only Yi Muyun? It's not that Tang Yu didn't notice the problem, but that there was nothing he could do. When he found out, the two little ones were already like this. One was domineering and the other was timid. They had been living like this for more than 10 years. If they could live like this for the rest of their lives, it would also be a kind of happiness. He only wanted the happiness of his children, not just Xiaoxin, but also Mu Yun. For Tang Yu, Mu Yun was his other child and had a special feeling for him. No matter whether he was with Xiaoxin or not, he was Boyi's successor. His daughter had long been spoiled by Mu Yunjiao. She thought that as her father, he didn't know that she failed every time. Because Mu Yun was around, it didn't matter if she was ignorant or incompetent, as long as she was happy. Tang Yu and Meng Qingcheng chatted for a while, and Meng Qingcheng roughly understood what he was thinking. The two old men sighed at the same time. It was better to leave Xiaoxin to Mu Yun. Moreover, they couldn't do anything about it now. After chatting, Meng Qingcheng walked into the ward. His princess Xiaoxin had not woken up yet, but looking at her sleeping appearance, he could tell that she was not sleeping well. The director of Xingyuan Hospital was guarding her. When he saw Meng Qingcheng come in, he said softly, she just woke up for a while, and now she's sleeping again. Meng Qingcheng's gaze fell on the little girl's face. He quietly looked at her for a while before he asked, did she say anything? The director smiled. She's probably not feeling well and cried for her brothers. The director smiled meaningfully. The entire Xingyuan Hospital knew that Yi Muyun had a close relationship with a little girl lying on the bed. Chapter 1970. He thought about it and realized that Mu Yun's appearance was also top-notch. Which girl wouldn't like him? Meng Qingcheng sat down and personally watched over the little girl. He looked up at the director and said, you can get off work first. It's fine as long as there's a doctor on duty. The director wanted to show his loyalty. Mr. Meng's status was very high, and it was rare to see him usually. However, Meng Qingcheng still sent him away indifferently because his little Xiaoxin hated to see a doctor in a white coat. He watched over her until 9:30 at night, when Cher finally woke up. Her eyes trembled slightly, and Meng Qingcheng obediently helped her up and carefully placed her on his shoulder. Xin, are you still not feeling well? Cher weakly rested her little head on his shoulder. After looking at her for a long time, she said softly, Uncle Meng, I feel dizzy. Meng Qingcheng watched her grow up. She was such a beautiful little person, so he had always been in pain. Thus, he put his forehead on her little head. Well, it's okay. Just bear with it for 2 days. He coaxed her like a father, and the little girl felt much better. She hooked her arms around his neck and said eagerly, I want to eat meat. Meng Qingcheng couldn't help but laugh. This child, just now she said that she had a headache, and now she wanted to eat meat. Mu Yun really spoiled her. Thus, he could only coax her. You can eat it in 2 days. Be good. Cher was just a little bit strong, and she would be fine after a while. She obediently tilted her head, and after a while, she said that she wanted to eat something again. Meng Qingcheng asked someone to make her porridge, which was easier to digest. After it was sent over, he personally fed the little girl, as if he was serving a little ancestor. Cher was hungry, so she obediently ate half a bowl and said that she couldn't eat anymore. Meng Qingcheng smiled and didn't force her. He fed her another half a cup of water. As soon as she finished drinking, Cher's phone rang. She reached for it and saw that it was a call from Yi Muyun. Take it. Meng Qingcheng smiled and took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. I'm going out for a smoke. As he spoke, he couldn't help but rub her long hair before walking out and closing the door behind him. Meng Qingcheng leaned against the door and smoked. There was a faint smile on his face. Xiaoxin and Mu Yun had grown up and had been in love for many years. He lowered his head and rubbed his forehead with his fingers. He thought of the little girl he liked many years ago. She had the same name as Xiaoxin, Tang Xian. A little girl like honey. Even in death, Meng Qingcheng would never forget the look on Tang Xian's face when she left. She was so young, but so calm. She was clearly so afraid, but when she faced death alone, she was so calm. When that tiny body lay lifelessly on the ground, Meng Qingcheng felt like he was going crazy. His head leaned against the door, and his eyes were a little warm for so many years. Even though he and Xiao Ran lived happily, even though he fell in love with Xiao Ran, there was still a place in his heart that belonged to Tang Xian. This was probably the reason why he loved Xiaoxin so much. Xiaoxin had grown up, and almost everyone called her Cher. However, Meng Qingcheng was still used to calling her Xin because that would make him feel closer to the little girl in his heart. It wasn't that Xiao Ran didn't notice it, but she didn't say anything. She would only hug him gently at night and call him Qingcheng when he occasionally thought of her. Sometimes, she would take the initiative to kiss him and provide her body for him to vent. That night, he would be especially fierce. Chapter 1971. In the ward, Cher picked up the phone. Yi Muyun's melodious voice drifted over. Baby, are you still feeling unwell? They had been together for almost 10 years, and he had rarely called her that. He had bullied her when they were young and bullied her when they grew up. It was only when she was sick that he would call her baby softly. It was only then that she would feel that he truly liked her in his heart and not tormented her just because he hated her. She lowered her voice. I'm much better. After a while, she seemed to have thought of something as she said softly, Brother, I'm fine. You don't have to rush back. There was a moment of silence before his voice was faint. I'll be at the hospital in 10 hours. She opened her mouth slightly, a little surprised. Did he come back in a rocket? He said a few more words, mostly to control her in a domineering manner before hanging up. Cher could feel that he was really busy, but she could not understand why he would fly back if he was so busy. After hanging up, she did not manage to stay awake for long before falling asleep again. She had a dream. She dreamed that her brother had returned, and that he was hugging her to sleep. He was hugging her so tightly that she could barely breathe. When she opened her eyes, she saw a large, handsome face. Cher was startled as she leaned back and called out timidly, Brother. He was here to visit her. Why was he sleeping on the same bed as her? This was a hospital, and the nurses would laugh if they saw them. And where was Uncle Meng? She looked around randomly, causing Yi Muyun to be displeased. He leaned against the headboard, still wearing the formal suit he had worn for the meeting yesterday, except that he had removed his jacket and tie. Stretching out his long, Liangqiu fingers, he pinched her chin gently. "What's wrong?" She looked at him anxiously. "What time is it now?" His gaze fell on her face, and he did not reply her question immediately. Instead, he hugged her gently in his arms, as though he was carrying a baby, afraid that he would hurt her. Cher felt a little uneasy being trapped in his arms. It was warm. Actually, it was comfortable. However, it was not that comfortable because she was a little afraid. He had been on a business trip for a few days. Was it because he couldn't get used to foreign food and wanted to eat milk buns? At this moment, he revealed his murderous gaze again. She shivered and wanted to escape, but she didn't have the chance. He had already lowered his head and gently kissed her little mouth, gently sucking on it. It had only been a few days since they last saw each other, and now she was in trouble again. He actually felt that it had been a long time since he had touched her like this. He kissed her lightly, and when she resisted, he forcefully entered her little mouth. He was into it, and he forced it on her. He had always been this domineering. Air's resistance was futile, so she could only obediently close her eyes and lift her little face to allow him to kiss her. Yi Muyun's gaze was heavy, and he lifted her chin so that he could kiss her even deeper. At this moment, the door was pushed open and Meng Qingqing's voice came from the doorway. "Xiaoxin, your classmates are here to see you, as well as the culprit." Meng Qingqing wanted to ease the tension, but who knew that when she opened the door, it would be an earth-shattering scene. Other than the culprit, there was a group of people following behind him. Zheng Xini, Zhou Chengguang, and a few classmates who were close to Zheng Xini. At this moment, they were all dumbfounded as they looked at the two people on the hospital bed. Zheng Xini whispered, "It's Cher's boyfriend." Chapter 1972. Everyone's gaze was focused on Zhou Chengguang's face, but Zhou Chengguang was oblivious to it as his gaze was still on the man on the bed. He remembered that he was her brother. How did he become her boyfriend now? His gaze was fervent, yet somewhat cold. Yi Muyun did not seem uncomfortable at all as he took the blanket and covered the girl's head with it. He sat up calmly and put on his shoes. When he got up, the only sound in the room was his expensive clothes rubbing against each other. Compared to the crowd at the door, he was much calmer as he whispered to the girl who was about to lift the blanket, "Lie down." A soft and fuzzy voice came from inside. "Brother, I can't breathe." Yi Muyun sat on the bed and lifted the blanket a little. Her little head popped out. Her hair was messy and her lips were slightly swollen. It was obvious that they had kissed for a long time. The light in Yi Muyun's eyes dimmed. Her slender fingers gently caressed her red lips and lightly rubbed them twice. Her movements were very slow and unhurried, giving off a kind of seductive feeling. Moreover, Yi Muyun's looks were top-notch. The few girls at the door blushed when they saw this scene. Oh my God! The man in front of them was even more handsome than Zhou Chengguang. Moreover, that elegant aura of nobility emanated from him, causing one's heart to palpitate. Also, the way he looked at Tang Cher was simply doting. Every girl had a dream of being a princess, and Tang Cher was obviously a princess among princesses. Zheng Xini's eyes felt a little hot, so people had two different ways of living. Uncle Meng, bring them to the guest room and entertain them. Yi Muyun's gaze was still on the girl's face as he said faintly. Meng Qingqing snapped out of his daze and smiled. Everyone this way. Getting the guest room was a matter of minutes. Before Zhou Chengguang left, he looked inside again. Yi Muyun looked up and happened to meet Zhou Chengguang's eyes. The two men's eyes met, and after 2 seconds, they understood each other's hostility. As the door closed, Yi Muyun rubbed Cher's head with his fingers and asked softly, "Who is he?" "You've met him before. He gave me the sketch at the school gate." Cher avoided the question. Yi Muyun glanced at her indifferently and then said softly, "He likes you." Although his tone was light, there was a kind of oppressive tension in it, as if he was in a superior position. Cher bit her lip and leaned back, biting her lips as she looked at him helplessly. Yi Muyun's eyes narrowed, and his voice sounded a little tense. Huh? I don't know. Her little head shook like nothing, but her expression betrayed her. Yi Muyun stared at her for a while before saying slowly, he's not bad looking. Cher's heart skipped a beat. She looked up instinctively and said anxiously, brother, don't provoke him. He held her little chin and said indifferently, as long as he doesn't provoke you, I won't do anything to him. She was forced to look at him for a long time. Her eyes were sore, and she felt a little wronged. She pursed her lips and threw a little tantrum. I don't like him. Yi Muyun's gaze seemed to be deep. Remember what you said today. His fingers delved in slightly and teased her gently. His voice was as slow as his movements. Don't let me find out that you like him. He pressed down on her back and pulled her into his arms. Chapter 1973. The kiss this time was different from the gentleness from before. It was like a punishment as he kissed her on the lips so harshly that it almost hurt her. Cher whimpered. She wanted to struggle, but he had always been domineering, and she went limp in a few kisses. She was folded in his arms, receiving his kisses and his anger. She didn't dare to provoke him when he was angry. She obediently let him kiss her until his anger subsided. However, even though his anger subsided, his other feelings rose again. The young man was a little embarrassed. He hugged the little girl and suppressed his boundless desire. In the end, he could only kiss her hastily to end it. His handsome face was buried in her soft neck, and his breathing was heavy. Cher was a little afraid. She wasn't completely clueless. She felt a little uneasy. He was holding it in now, but when he couldn't, would he eat her up? She knew that even if he wanted to, she wouldn't dare to resist. She obediently let him hug her, pursing her lips. After a while, his voice rang in her ear. Be good. I missed you. Her body froze for a moment. Then, his face shifted slightly towards her, and his voice was soft and gentle. Did you miss me? As he asked, he nibbled on her neck gently. It was an indescribable charm. She wasn't used to it, and she couldn't stand it either. Her little hands gripped his shirt tightly, and she leaned on his shoulder, trembling slightly. Eventually, she was really scared and reminded him softly, Brother, I'm still sick. Yi Muyun continued to nibble on her neck for a while before letting her go. He patted her little face and said, You're making excuses. Then, he got up and said as he put on his shoes, Sister Lee will be here in a while. I'll go over there first. Don't run around. She replied with an oath and watched him walk into the washroom. His position had always been impeccable. When he came out, he was already in full glory. What was even more amazing was that he had actually changed into a more casual outfit. The little girl thought about it and was still worried. She reminded him, Don't be so fierce. He didn't do it on purpose. Yi Muyun was walking towards the door, but he turned back and looked at her with a faint smile. Then he chuckled and said, Okay. He was a person who rarely smiled and was difficult to please. He was also very stubborn. Cher didn't know why he was so happy right now. She hugged her body and stared at it for a long time. Yi Muyun's heart was boiling. He scolded him for being an idiot and went out. You're calling me stupid again? I'm stupid, but you're still sticking to me. If you give birth to an idiot in the future, you're going to call me an idiot again. Cher stuck out her tongue, her face burning. She didn't want to have children with him. At this time, Sister Lee came over. Yi Muyun said a few words at the door. Sister Lee was worried and pained, so she quickly came in to serve the little princess. Yi Muyun took out his mobile phone from his pocket and contacted Meng Qingqing. Then he walked to the guest room. When he pushed the door open, the room was filled with the smell of fragrant tea. The few young people were well received. Meng Qingqing casually chatted for a while and looked at Yi Muyun coming over. He smiled and said, You're here. You should greet them. You're about the same age and have a common language. As he said this, Meng Qingqing seemed to introduce him intentionally or unintentionally. Yi Muyun, Vice President Boyi. He paused for a while and said meaningfully, He's Cher's brother. If I'm not mistaken, he'll also be her future husband. His words were very straightforward because Meng Qingcheng could also see that among this group of children, the best-looking one was unusually concerned about Xiaoxin. Chapter 1974. After Meng Qingcheng finished speaking, he went out first. Zhou Chengguang's expression changed slightly. Meng Qingcheng's words meant that the relationship between Yi Muyun and Tang Sher had actually been approved by the elders. Childhood sweethearts, with the tacit approval of their parents, marriage was probably a matter of time. Zhou Chengguang's eyes were a little gloomy, but how could the passion in his heart be extinguished so easily? Yi Muyun sat down and said calmly, "I thank everyone for their concern on behalf of Cher. In addition, as long as she's fine, I won't pursue the matter." In other words, if something happened, he wouldn't let it go. Everyone's expression was a little ugly. And the man who hit the basketball was Zhou Chengguang's classmate Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang came from a small place and had never seen the world. Seeing that Yi Muyun was about the same age as her and had a threatening aura, she immediately felt angry and wanted to fight for justice for Zhou Chengguang. Zhou Chengguang, the Prince Charming of B University, would definitely not be worse than this man in the future. Xiaoyang said indifferently, "I hit the ball, so if there's anything, just come at me, and I'll pay for the medical expenses." Zhou Chengguang wanted to stop her, but it was too late. Yi Muyun sat leisurely, his slender fingers gently tapping on the coffee table beside him, his voice still indifferent. "Okay." He took out his phone and dialed the dean's number. After a while, the dean came over with a respectful attitude. "Young Master Yi, what can I do for you?" Yi Muyun's chin moved slightly. "Give Cher's bill to this classmate. He'll be responsible for her medical expenses in the future." The dean's expression darkened, and he was a little embarrassed. He said hesitantly, "I'm afraid I can't afford it, right?" Xiaoyang was young and full of vigor. Although she came from a small town, her family was well off, and she could afford a few $1,000s. Most importantly, she couldn't embarrass Zhou Chengguang, so she stiffened her neck and said, "Give it to me. I said I'll take responsibility, and I'll take responsibility until the end." The dean sighed. He was young and insensible. Did young Master Yi mention money to him? However, people insisted on carrying to the end, and the dean had no way. Yi Xiaoya couldn't be offended, so he went out and found a nurse to bring the list. Although it was a hospital owned by the Tang family, they still had to pay for it. After a while, the nurse brought it over and handed it to the director. The dean closed the door and looked at Yi Muyun. Yi Muyun glanced at him, and the dean immediately put him down in front of Xiaoyang. Xiaoyang glared at Yi Muyun and went to get the bill. Her mouth was unforgiving. "I don't believe that this small amount of medical expenses can kill someone." Just as he finished speaking, he stared blankly.
What?
Over 30,000 yuan in one night. How is this possible? How is this possible? Xiaoyang almost jumped up. "You're too much of a bully. It must be fake. I don't believe it." The dean wiped his sweat. He was also quite embarrassed. "This classmate, our hospital's VIP ward costs 30,000 yuan a night, no discounts." He paused. "For the patient's health, the toilet is made of pure gold. It's very expensive, and there's only one. It's expensive for a reason." Xiaoyang's face had a trace of color. 30,000 yuan a night, then wouldn't it be more than 200,000 a week? Chapter 1975. Now that Xiaoyang thought about it, he started to resent Cher. Did she have to be so pampered? The director wanted to say something, but Yi Muyun said, "Cher has lived like this since she was a child. She has never taken the bus or the subway. She even uses a private plane to travel. A piece of clothing costs at least tens of thousands. Do you think she's cheating you now?" He had never used money to make things difficult for others, but since someone wanted to talk about money, he didn't mind making things clear. Xiaoyang's face was drained of blood. He was in an awkward situation. Zhou Chengguang patted him, then said to Yi Muyun, "Mr. Yi, I'll pay for this." Yi Muyun's gaze fell on his face, and he smiled. Okay. He looked at Zhou Chengguang deeply, and there was an imperceptible hostility in his eyes. At this moment, Zheng Xini said softly, I'm sorry. I dragged Cher to watch the game with me. She wanted to say something to help, but she regretted it as soon as she said it. What if she had to bear the huge medical expenses? Zheng Xini's round face was filled with uneasiness, and she bit her lip. Yi Muyun's gaze fell on her face. After a while, he said, You guys go first. He got up. He had no intention of dealing with them. If it weren't for the fact that he wanted to meet this Zhou Chengguang, he wouldn't even be willing to deal with them. Just as he opened the door, Cher stood at the door. She was wearing a coat that Yi Muyun had left in the ward. She looked especially petite. Why did you come out? Yi Muyun said. His voice was a little hoarse as he reached out to support her. Cher leaned lightly on his shoulder and raised her little face. There was a hint of flattery on her face. Brother, I was careless. Don't make things difficult for them. She said softly, in a tone that only he could hear, and in a soft and delicate voice. She said, You'll bring trouble to me if you do this. Yi Muyun looked at her soft face and reached out to rub her little head. He said calmly, Forget it then. Did he just agree? She couldn't believe it, but she immediately recovered and said to Xiao Yang, I'm sorry, my brother was just joking with you. Xiao Yang smiled weakly. How could she say anything else? Cher then looked at Zhou Chengguang and the others and smiled. Thank you for coming to see me. Yi Muyun looked at her and smiled. He frowned and carried her in his arms. All right, go back and lie down to rest. Cher was used to being hugged by him. Although she was a little uncomfortable, she still gently wrapped her arms around his neck, afraid that she would fall. The young men and women in the reception room looked at each other with complicated feelings. People were truly different from each other. Tang Xue'er's life was like that of a princess. Xiao Yang looked at Zhou Chengguang and sighed. Forget it. Zhou Chengguang, on the other hand, was deep in thought. After a while, he said with certainty, They won't be together. One was so strong, and the other looked very gentle and well-behaved. But no matter how well-behaved they would grow up one day. When that day came, the little white rabbit would yearn for the outside world and would want to escape from the big bad wolf. Zhou Chengguang looked down. It was undeniable that Yi Muyun was a man with a very strong aura. He couldn't believe that he was the same age as him. He was so scheming that he could be compared to a man in his 40s. What kind of environment did he develop such a state of mind? Chapter 1976. Yi Muyun brought Cher back to the ward and helped her lie down to rest. Cher didn't want to lie down and clamored to get up. He pressed her down and said, Be obedient. I don't want to be obedient. Cher pursed her lips. Yi Muyun's expression froze. He pressed her down and said calmly, Cher, what do you want to do then? She swallowed the words that were on the tip of her tongue and looked at him. Brother, you're so busy. Won't it be too tiring? He sat by the bed and looked at her face intently. I won't be tiring if you're obedient. Obedient? Cher was a little dazed. She was already obedient enough. He said that he didn't want her to be on duty at the student union, so she never went there again. He said that she would go home after school, and she never interacted with her classmates. She had no friends, and he was the only one in her world. Wasn't that enough? She lowered her eyes and didn't say a word, but he could tell that she was obviously a little emotional. She was sick, but Yi Muyun was still willing to coax her. He reached out and pinched her little face. Be good. I'll bring you a gift next time. Cher bit her lip. I have a lot of gifts. He liked to buy her clothes and jewelry. He bought almost all her clothes, including all the sizes and styles. She didn't need to go shopping at all, nor did she have the chance to. The only person who could go out with her was Yi Muyun, and he was always busy. She was 18 years old and he was only 20, but they were like an old married couple when they were together. Cher didn't know when she had such a thought, but she just felt that it wasn't right for them to be like this. Even if they were the last people to be together, it wasn't right for them to be like this, however. She didn't have the courage to say it out loud. She lowered her eyes. You don't have to buy me anything. You should rest more when you have time. Yi Muyun hooked her little chin with one hand and studied her expression carefully. After a while, he said softly, I'll make time. Cher looked up at him. She didn't know where the courage came from, but she murmured, I don't need a present. After saying that, she said firmly, yes, I don't need a gift. The air froze. Yi Muyun's gaze darkened as he looked at the little girl. He frowned and then pretended to be relaxed. Then tell me, what do you want? Cher bit her lip, her heart pounding. After a while, she said, I don't want to have special privileges in school. I want to be on duty. I also want to be able to say yes when my classmates ask me to barbecue. She looked at him expectantly. Perhaps because she was not feeling well, her palm-sized face had a particularly weak beauty to it. It was different from her usual naivety. Yi Muyun was also a man, a straight man. Although he was annoyed with her, he couldn't help but lean forward and kiss her little mouth, tasting it again and again. Cher had never dared to resist his kisses. She obediently raised her head and let him kiss her. After he had tasted enough, he narrowed his eyes and rubbed her lips lightly with his fingertips. Do you like to be with them? His voice was still gentle, so Cher nodded her head hard. Yes. Then she added, I like to be with my brother more. She looked at him with a flattering gaze. Yi Muyun was probably pleased. He reached out and stroked her long hair. When I come back from my business trip, I have to go home on time. He paused for a while. I'll make time to accompany you in the future. Chapter 1977. So she reached out to hug him and praised him softly. Brother is the best. Yi Muyun looked down at her and rubbed her long hair. He held her in his arms and kissed her for a while before whispering, I have to rush back to America in the afternoon. She was stunned and then nodded. Don't worry about me. His eyes quietly fell in front of her and he snorted. You look like you want me to leave as soon as possible. No, absolutely not. The little girl hugged his waist. Xin can't bear to leave you. Whether she was telling the truth or not, he believed her. He rubbed her long hair and said softly, Be good, I'll be back in half a month. She nodded obediently and let him hug her. She was not a heartless person. She knew that he was good to her. In this world, there was probably no one who treated her better than Yi Muyun. And now that he indulged her and was willing to listen to her requests, she felt that she seemed to like him a little. After so many years together, this was the first time that she had taken the initiative to think that she liked him. She raised her little face and took the initiative to kiss him on the cheek. Yi Muyun was stunned for a moment. He reached out to touch his face and it took him a long time to recover. She was the one who kissed him. His smile was unbelievably gentle as he lay on his side next to her. When a young man and a woman hugged each other on the bed, it was easy for things to go wrong. But he was always worried about her health, so he did not dare to be too rash and let her go after kissing her for a while. After Xiaoxin fell asleep, Yi Muyun got up and went to talk to her attending doctor for a while. He was relieved to make sure that she was fine. She was a good sleeper. He stayed with her for a long time but had to leave in the afternoon. His special assistant, Guze, was already waiting outside. Yi Muyun sat on the bed and his fingers scratched Cher's tender little face. He said very softly, Baby, I have to go. She did not wake up. She just turned over and naturally hugged his arm. He was stunned for a moment and then smiled lightly. He scratched her little face and said, Little brat. He was only 2 years older than her, but God knew that he treated her like a daughter. After staying for a while longer, he gently pulled his arm away, covered her with a blanket, and walked out. When he reached the door, Guze said softly, Mr. Yi, the car is downstairs. Yi Muyun paused for a moment. He didn't say anything and walked straight to the elevator. In the ward, the little girl who was lying down opened one of her eyes and blinked. Then, she sat up abruptly and rolled around on the bed while hugging the pillow. She was extremely happy. Then, she lay down and sent a WeChat moments. I'm going to eat skewers. When she posted it, she blocked everyone. In fact, her circle of friends was very simple. Almost all of them were friends and family. After the full screen was turned off, she quietly sent it out. She felt a little sad looking at it. It seemed that her world was indeed very small. She only dared to fight for that little bit. She was very clear that she could only take a breather when he was not around. He was back, and every night her time was his. Shui looked at her post. No one liked it, no one commented on it. She commented on one of her posts, "A life without freedom is an incomplete life. Love without freedom is just a cage." Chapter 1978. Cher's a little nervous and picked up the call. "I'm boarding the plane in a while. Be good." Yi Muyun's voice was faint and there was a hint of affection in it that was hard to detect. She replied, He didn't speak again. She could hear his light breathing. She didn't know why, but she blushed and hung up the phone. Yi Muyun stared at the phone and raised an eyebrow at Gu Zhe. "She dared to hang up on me." Gu Zhe smiled faintly. Mr. Yi has spoiled her. Gu Zhe's words must have pleased Yi Muyun. He didn't argue with the little girl and turned off the plane. When the plane took off, the little girl from Shengyuan Hospital rolled around on the bed. She was so happy. Originally, she was going to be hospitalized for a week for observation. After 3 days of observation, she went home. Of course, the dean of Shengyuan Hospital personally explained this to Yi Muyun for more than an hour. All kinds of professional terms were used until his mouth was dry. Only then was young Master Yi satisfied. He called the little girl again and stayed for 2 hours. All right. Cher lay on her stomach and said in a light voice, "I'm almost 18. Yi Muyun said in a low voice, "You're not 18 yet. You're still a kid." He put on the attitude of a superior. "Have you forgotten that you failed the exam?" Cher let him say whatever he wanted. She was already used to his preaching. In the end, he let her off because he had a meeting to attend. That night, Cher slept very well. She was going to school by herself tomorrow. There was no chauffeur and no devil. She woke up at 8 in the morning. Sister Lee made her a fragrant breakfast. When she walked out of the villa with her school bag, Sister Lee waved at her, as though she was sending off a primary school student. Cher turned around and waved. "I'll be back early." Sister Lee's eyes were a little teary. Her little cutie had finally taken the first step bravely. When Cher took the bus to school, she was half an hour late. It turned out that public buses were so much slower than private cars. When she entered the classroom, she stuck out her tongue, but her mood was very light. It was the same class, but she didn't feel like sleeping. She sat down and casually drew a picture of a tortoise and a rabbit race. On the back of the tortoise, she wrote the words Yi Muyun. Then, she childishly drew the rabbit to run very fast so that he couldn't catch up. She smiled childishly. It was a lovely, innocent smile. Zhou Chengguang stood outside the Year 1 classroom and looked at the smile on Tang Cher's face. He had never seen anyone smile so clean and pure. He couldn't help but want to hold it in his hand and treasure it. He looked at her quietly. After a long while, Zhao Zi sighed. Chengguang, no matter how pretty she is, she's still someone else's girlfriend. Stop looking at her. There are plenty more fish in the sea, right? That's different. Zhou Chengguang mumbled, I've always thought that I'm not a pervert. Only today did I realize that it's because I've never met a girl who can truly move me. Zhao Zi shook his head. You're crazy. Zhou Chengguang smiled and patted his shoulder. You don't understand. Zhao Zi said, Isn't it just a woman? What's there to not understand? He still tried to persuade him sincerely. Yi Muyun isn't someone to be trifled with.
Think about it.
He's the same age as us, but he's the vice president of Boyi. How much scheming must he be? Chapter 1979. Zhou Chengguang tilted his head and stared at Zhao Zi for a long time before he smiled faintly. Zi, I understand. I don't have to get her. I just want her to have another choice. He thought to himself, is that kind of half-forced relationship that we grew up together called love? If it's not, then I'll take away her love. Love doesn't come first. Love is love, and not love is not love. There's no logic to it. Zhao Zi shook his head disapprovingly. You just won't give up until you reach the bridgehead.
He paused for a while.
Chengguang, think about your family and Rongguang Enterprise. I heard from a cousin that Yi Muyun is ruthless. With his position in Boi, it's not impossible for him to destroy Rongguang. Zhou Chengguang laughed. This is my business. It has nothing to do with my family. Zhao Zi wanted to say something, but Zhou Chengguang had already entered the classroom. Today they were here to select new members of the student union. In addition to some key cadres, they were still missing a few team members. To put it bluntly, they were just doing odd jobs. Cher had been assigned to be on duty the first day, but that time was a transfer, so it didn't count. But this time, Zhou Chengguang had his own motives. Out of so many classes, he chose Cher's class. The arrival of the school hunk made all the girls in the class excited and rushed to sign up. In the end, because there were too many people signing up, they had to vote without counting the names. The results were announced. It was Cher and two other inconspicuous girls. The whole class was silent. Tang Cher? The school hunk carried her to the infirmary personally, and Cher didn't sign up. How did she get selected without signing up? It was easy to understand the mystery behind it. Cher had unknowingly become the public enemy of all the girls in the class. Even Zheng Xinyi looked at her with a slightly complicated gaze. Zhou Chengguang smiled and walked to Cher. She was still sitting. She did not look up to him or lick his boots like the others. Stay here in the afternoon. I will teach you in the student union. The voice of the school hunk was as elegant and pleasant as a piano, causing the girls to cheer. When Zhou Chengguang walked out, Cher was stunned. She immediately stood up and whispered behind him, I didn't sign up. Zhou Chengguang heard this. The vice president, Zhao Zi, also heard it. Of course, the whole class heard it. Of course, Zhou Chengguang was embarrassed, but he turned around and smiled. This year's art committee member is out of school due to illness, and there's no one to replace him. Tang Cher, don't you want to try? He paused for a moment. Your painting is very good. Xiaohan will need fresh blood. Zhou Chengguang looked at Cher. Unless you're afraid. You don't have the guts to accept such a challenge. I don't think you've done anything on your own since you were young, except eating and dressing. Cher glared at him and said word by word, You're wrong. Zhou Chengguang raised his brows. Cher's usually soft and tender face tensed up. Even if it's eating and dressing, someone will do it for me. Her self-righteousness stunned the whole class. Zhao Zi, who was beside Zhou Chengguang, burst out laughing. He said in a low voice, This little sheep has quite a character. Interesting. It's not bad to recruit her into the student union. Cher pursed her lips. But I'll let you know that I don't just know how to eat and dress. I can also publish the school magazine. You're ambitious, young lady. Zhao Zi jeered. Chapter 1980. However, the corner of his mouth was slightly upturned. That little fool really couldn't stand the provocation and fell for it at once. He left, and the atmosphere in the class was a little subtle. After all, Zhou Chengguang was the Prince Charming of the school, and Tang Cher seemed to be the one who was favored by the Prince Charming. No one expected that the school hunk, who had always kept girls at arm's length, would one day pursue a girl without distinguishing between public and private interests. It could be seen that he came today for Tang Cher. A talent and a beauty. A match made in heaven. Cher realized it in hindsight, but the words had already been said, and there was no way to change it. She looked around, pursed her lips, and said nothing. Zheng Xinyi smiled a little weakly. Congratulations, Cher. Cher's smile was even weaker than hers. Can I regret it? Zheng Xinyi's expression was subtle. Probably not. Cher sat down and lay there for a while, until she went to the student union to report after school in the afternoon. Zheng Xinyi went with her. After that, Zheng Xian was very busy with work because Zhou Chengguang was there. She tried hard to make Zhou Chengguang pay attention to her. She was the outstanding one. After Cher went there, the school magazine was not published for the time being. She was a little bored, so she lay there and drew. Zhou Chengguang had a meeting with his team members, and he would see the little girl at the end of the meeting from time to time. She was so out of place here, but she was so cute. The setting sun shone on her little face, and the fine hair was golden, which looked very cute. Zhou Chengguang was distracted, and his eyes fell on Cher's face, and he didn't move for a long time. In the end, Zhao Zi pushed him, and he came back to his senses. Everyone had a tacit understanding. Zhou Chengguang liked Tang Cher. Really, Tang Cher's beauty was the kind that even if she was ignorant and incompetent, even if she had no good points, just her beauty alone was enough to win people's hearts. That kind of beauty was not something that everyone could touch. It needed to be supported with wealth, and Zhou Chengguang would be able to support such a little wife in the future. Everyone worshipped Zhou Chengguang. When he was in a meeting, no one dared to be absent-minded, except for the new girl. Zhou Chengguang was 2 meters away, but he could still see her drawing on the paper. It was still her brother. His eyes dimmed slightly. After the meeting, most of the people went back to their own work. Cher was still lying there and drawing. Zhou Chengguang walked over and knocked on the table. "Can I have a look?" Cher's gaze fell on his face. After a while, she showed him the paper. Zhou Chengguang looked at them quietly for a while and smiled. "Have you been together for a long time?" Cher took the paper and continued drawing. She only acknowledged softly. Zhou Chengguang sat down slowly and looked at her exquisite side profile. He coughed lightly and said, "You will like him a lot?" Actually, he had acknowledged Yi Muyun from the bottom of his heart. That man was not someone that he or Zhao Zi could compare to. But he was confident that he could also give her a good life, and he could also give her freedom. It was too depressing for her to be with Yi Muyun. She was like a puppet, and he didn't think that she would be very happy. Cher didn't look up and only acknowledged again. Zhou Chengguang's face was a little hot. After all, he was a traditional man, and what he was doing now was poaching. But she nodded to admit it, and he was still disappointed. It turned out that she really liked Yi Muyun. She wasn't forcing herself, but they were just innocent. Chapter 1981. The call was from Yi Muyun. His voice was a little hoarse. "Cher, where are you?" Obviously, he had called this number when he woke up in the morning in America. Cher bit the tip of her pen and said softly after a while, "At school." On the other side, Yi Muyun looked at his watch and narrowed his eyes. "Who else?" Cher looked around. "There are a lot of people, about 7 or 8. Yi Muyun's voice became hoarser. "Boys or girls?" Cher's voice was soft like cotton candy. "None of them are as handsome as you, brother." Her words pleased Mr. Yi Muyun. He smiled and got up with his phone. He walked straight to the bathroom, took off his pee with one hand, and talked to her on the phone with the other. Cher frowned when she heard the voice. She asked softly, "Brother, what are you doing?" Yi Muyun calmly said 2 words and immediately said, "You're not allowed to hang up." The little girl heard him brushing his teeth, so she couldn't help asking, "Did you wash your hands?" He directly said no. Cher didn't say anything. "Baby, I'm just an ordinary person." Yi Muyun's voice was very low. "Do you miss me?" Cher's face was a little hot because of his sudden tenderness. After a while, she said softly, "Yes." Yi Muyun was satisfied. "I'll be back in a week." Maybe because he was in a hurry, he hung up soon. Cher put down the phone and blushed slightly. Zhou Chengguang looked at her and smiled. "It's him." "Yes." Shuai lifted her eyes and smiled. Zhou Chengguang was smart enough not to continue asking, but it wasn't that he wasn't touched. It was impossible to say that she didn't like Yi Muyun at all. Because when she was talking to Yi Muyun, her eyes were bright and beautiful, which he had never seen before. He felt bitter in his heart. It was not that he had no confidence in himself, but that his opponent was too strong. Cher hung up the phone and looked at the time. It was getting late. "Zhou Chengguang, I want to leave first." She had nothing to do anyway. She had come to the student union not only because she was provoked, but also because she wanted to experience the feeling of freedom. Zhou Chengguang stared at her for a while before he slowly said, "There's a welcoming party for new students tonight. Are you coming? He was young, and his eyes burned as he looked at her intently. Zhao Zi, who was at the side, heard this and laughed in his heart. It's already been a month since school started, and there's still a welcome party for new students. It was obvious that he wanted to get closer to the young lady. However, he still didn't expose Zhou Chengguang. Cher hesitated for a moment before asking softly, "Can we have skewers?" She had an inexplicable obsession with eating skewers. Perhaps it was because she didn't go when Zheng Xini and the others invited her in the past, so she had been brooding over it. At this moment, her eyes were sparkling like the brightest stars in the sky. Zhou Chengguang looked at her for a long time before he chuckled softly. "Of course. Then I'll go," she actually said somewhat childishly, and then continued to draw her picture while lying on her stomach. She was still drawing Yi Muyun. Zhou Chengguang felt as though he had gone crazy. In her heart, in her world, there was clearly only that man, but he still wanted to get involved. Even if it was just a glance at him, even if she was by his side thinking of someone else, he was willing. Chapter 1982. Zhou Chengguang felt that his heart had never been so soft before. He had never treated a girl so sincerely. Zhao Zi understood him. He clapped his hands and said, "All right, I'll now announce that there will be an event tonight. The president will treat us to kebabs." They were all young people and naturally liked group activities. Moreover, it was Zhou Chengguang who was treating, so everyone applauded and cheered. Only Zheng Xini's smile was a little forced. Her gaze fell on Cher's face, and she realized that Cher was also looking at Zhou Chengguang, and she was smiling. After that, the work progressed quickly. Everyone gathered before 7 o'clock. Most of them were boarding students, so most of them rode their bicycles. Cher didn't know how to ride a bicycle. When she was hesitating about whether she should hail a taxi, Zhou Chengguang's car stopped in front of her. "Get in the car." His voice was gentle. "I'll take you there." Cher took a small step back and was a little hesitant. Ever since she was young, she had never interacted with any young men except Yi Muyun, let alone Zhou Chengguang. She didn't take it to heart, but it didn't mean that she was a blockhead. As if sensing her hesitation, Zhou Chengguang deliberately scared her. "If you hail a taxi at this hour, you might meet a weird uncle. He likes young and beautiful girls the most." Cher glanced at him. "You look like a middle-aged eccentric uncle right now." Zhou Chengguang smiled brightly. "Really? I always thought that my image was very positive." He paused and patted the seat cushion behind him. "Get in, or it'll be too late." Cher thought about it and sat on the seat, keeping a distance of 20 centimeters from him. Of course, Zhou Chengguang could feel it. He smiled slightly and rode out of the school gate with the little girl. The night wind blew her long hair, and there was a faint fragrance in the air. Cher sat on the back seat, smelling the kapok flowers on both sides of the road. She closed her eyes slightly. It wasn't because of who she was with, but because at this moment she really smelled the scent of freedom. She greedily looked at the night view of B City and everything on the streets. Everything was new to her. Zhou Chengguang rode a bicycle with her. It should have taken them only 10 minutes to get there, but they ended up riding for half an hour. He took a detour. Zhao Zi chose a famous barbecue restaurant. The group of 10 or so people sat down and waited for Zhou Chengguang and Cher. They waited for about 15 minutes. As for the reason why Zhou Chengguang was late, those who were tactful had a tacit understanding. Although the girls had thoughts about Zhou Chengguang, because Zhou Chengguang had never expressed his feelings, they were not particularly upset. On the contrary, it was quite interesting to see the school's Prince Charming chasing after a girl. Zhou Chengguang went in with Cher. It was a peaceful scene. Zhao Zi and the others had already ordered their food. Not long after they sat down, plates of skewers were served. Cher stared at them for a long time, then carefully took a small bite. The taste was a little strange, but after 2 bites, she felt that it was quite delicious. Zhou Chengguang kept looking at her with a doting expression. He even handed her a beer. Cher reached out to take it. She hesitated for a moment and looked around. Everyone else was drinking. She really wanted to try it, so she took a small sip. It didn't taste very good and was sour. She didn't want to drink anymore, but Zhao Zi and the others still forced her to drink 2 glasses. She had never drunk alcohol before, so 2 glasses was enough to make her slightly drunk. Her face was red, and she was drunk. Chapter 1983. She hadn't forgotten that she had to go home early. Yi Muyun would call her at 9 o'clock. But she didn't want to leave when she saw everyone chatting. She was actually a little greedy. It wasn't that she liked these people, but she yearned for freedom and freedom. She had the urge to turn off her phone so that he wouldn't be able to find her. But she didn't dare to. She felt that she was like Cinderella. She had to show her true colors when the time came. So, at 8:30, she leaned on the table and said that she wanted to go home. Zhou Chengguang looked at her and sighed softly. What should we do? Do you know where she lives? We can use our privileges to check. Zhao Zi drank a few bottles, but his expression didn't change. Zhou Chengguang smiled. He took his phone and logged into the school's website. When he saw the address, he took another look at Cher. Pei Garden was a gift from Tang Yu to Pei Chichi. Everyone in B City knew about it. And the fact that she was living in Pei Garden still made Zhou Chengguang feel a little pressured. Just as he was in a daze, Zhao Zi saw it too and couldn't help but take another look at him. Zhou Chengguang quietly kept his phone and said calmly, I'll send her back. Right after he said that, Zhang Xini stood up abruptly. Her face was a little red as she gritted her teeth. I'll go with you. Zhou Chengguang looked at Zhang Xini for a while before saying calmly, I'll send her back alone. After that, I'll go straight home. Zhang Xini couldn't say anything else. Although Cher was drunk, she was a good drinker. The moment Zhou Chengguang asked her to go home, she got up obediently and held onto Zhou Chengguang's arm as they walked outside. Zhou Chengguang picked up her school bag and carried it. He nodded at Zhao Zi. Help me ride my bike back. Zhao Zi smiled and caught the car keys he tossed over. After Zhou Chengguang left, he couldn't help but tease him a little. Outside the barbecue restaurant, Zhou Chengguang was helping Cher to stop a taxi. It was almost 9 o'clock, and it was difficult to get a taxi. Cher had always been a delicate woman, so how could she endure such hardship? She was drunk and tired, and soon, she could not take it anymore. Half of her body leaned on Zhou Chengguang's arm, and her voice was unclear. I want to go home. She did not forget that her brother would call her before she went to bed at night. She looked at her watch. It was already past 9 o'clock. Right at this moment, her phone rang. Her little face was filled with an unconcealable panic. Her little hand reached for her phone. In the end, it was Zhou Chengguang who found it in her bag and handed it to her. Brother, she was so obedient and quiet that she did not seem like a drunk girl at all. Her voice was heart-wrenching. However, no matter how normal she acted, Yi Muyun, who was far away in America, could not help but frown and ask softly, What are you doing? Cher was always drunk. Even though she was afraid of him, she was not good at lying. Right now, her brain was even worse. She looked around in a daze before replying, I'm waiting for a taxi outside. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes. Where? I'll get someone to pick you up. Cher looked around, and her head was even more muddled now. After a long time, she spoke. I'm eating skewers. Eating skewers? Yi Muyun's sharp senses told him that there was something wrong with her as he asked coldly, You've been drinking? Yeah. Cher frowned and acted coquettishly. It tastes pretty bad. Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes. Stay where you are and don't move. I'll get someone to pick you up. Chapter 1984. Cher put down the phone in a daze and looked at Zhou Chengguang. Someone will come to pick me up later. You continue to eat with them. As she spoke, her body swayed a little. Zhou Chengguang supported her and said in a low voice, I shouldn't have let you drink. She was so strictly controlled that she must have never touched these things. Although he liked her, he didn't want to cause trouble for her. He didn't want her to be put in a difficult position by that person. Yi Muyun's world was a world that Zhou Chengguang couldn't understand. It was a mysterious and unknown world. Perhaps he would enter that world one day, but he thought that it might take him 10 or 20 years to reach that height. Unknowingly, he was in awe of that man who was the same age as him. He still insisted on accompanying her to wait for the car, but he knew in his heart that it was unlikely for them to be together. Meng Qingqing's car arrived in less than 20 minutes. It was driven by the driver, Xiao Zhao. Meng Qingqing was also in the car. It just so happened that he had a social engagement just now, so it was very close. The car stopped, and Meng Qingqing got out of the car personally. When he saw Cher and Zhou Chengguang standing side by side, he was stunned for a moment, and his expression was a little complicated. He sighed in his heart. Xiao Xue. Cher looked at Meng Qingqing as if she was looking at her biological father. In fact, Meng Qingqing didn't treat her any less than Tang Yu, her biological father. Holding the slightly drunk girl, he turned his head and looked at Zhou Chengguang. Thank you for taking care of her. For an elder like Meng Qingqing, Zhou Chengguang had a good impression of him. He smiled slightly. She only drank 2 glasses of beer. They are all classmates, and there are no messy people. Don't worry, uncle. For this kid, Meng Qingqing looked at him a little more, and he had a good impression of him. He sighed in his heart that such a show-off young man deserved Xiao Xue, if it wasn't for Mu Yun. Perhaps she was very tired and sleepy. When Xiao Xue touched Meng Qingqing, she was completely relieved and fell asleep on his shoulder. Zhou Chengguang looked at her, and his eyes flickered slightly. He was also a meticulous person, and he could immediately understand that in her subconscious, he, Zhou Chengguang, was not a reliable person. Even when she was drunk, she could still maintain her consciousness. Now, her look softened, and this was probably the difference between a family member and an outsider. Zhou Chengguang's heart turned a little cold, but he still closed the car door for Meng Qingqing very gracefully. Goodbye, uncle. Uncle, Meng Chengguang's heart, and he said in a low voice. The car slowly started, and with one hand holding Xiao Xue, Meng Qingqing dialed Mu Yun's number with the other, and said in a low voice, I got it, and it's getting late. I'll bring her home, and let your Aunt Xiao take care of her. Mu Yun was at ease to leave the person in Meng Qingqing's hands. He trusted Meng Qingqing completely, because he heard about Tang Xian's story from Pei Qiqi. Mu Yun knew that Xiao Xue and Meng Qingqing were actually special. He was very possessive, but he was quite generous when Meng Qingqing occasionally took Xiao Xue out for a meal. Meng Qingqing also seemed to understand that this was the tacit understanding between the two men. After hanging up the phone, the black limousine drove towards the Meng family's villa and far away in New York. After putting down the phone, Mu Yun's face darkened. His phone just received a few photos, and they were all of Cher and Zhou Chengguang. Chapter 1985. She was smiling at that person. Mu Yun had always thought that she would only smile like that at him, but it turned out that she could also smile at others. The golden pen broke into 2 in his hand. Was this the freedom she wanted? His special assistant, Gu Zhe, stood behind him and said softly, Mr. Yi, it's time for the meeting. Mu Yun paused for 2 seconds before slowly turning around. His voice was a little tired. Okay, I got it. City B. Meng Qingqing's car slowly stopped on the lawn in front of the villa. After the car stopped, the driver opened the door for him, and he got out of the car with Cher in his arms. Mr. Meng, do you want me to come? The driver had also watched Cher grow up. CEO Meng had drunk a lot tonight, so he asked worriedly. Meng Qingqing said calmly, It's okay.
You can go and rest.
The driver was silent for a while, but he still left. The elders of the Tang and Meng families all knew about the relationship between Meng Qingqing and Tang Xian. Although it didn't start, it still left a regret. Meng Qingqing treated Tang Xian well. Everyone saw it, but no one said it out loud. Meng Qingqing had drunk a little tonight. At this moment, he was a little drunk. His head was a little dizzy, and his steps were a little light. Fortunately, the little girl in his arms was still as light as a feather. Xiaoran stood on the stairs and watched Meng Qingqing bring Cher back. He wasn't surprised at all. In the past, when Mu Yun was on a business trip, He would look for Qingcheng to take care of him. After so many years, he had long gotten used to it. In fact, Xiao Ran even treated Xiaoxin like a daughter. She took 2 steps down and said softly, "Qingcheng, is she asleep?" He stuck his head out to take a look and smelled the alcohol. He couldn't help but ask, "Did she drink?" Meng Qingcheng saw that his wife had already changed into her pajamas, so he guessed that she must have woken up after sleeping. A warm feeling rose in his heart, and he replied, "I had 2 drinks with my classmates from school. I picked up Miyun's call and brought it back on the way." He and his wife had been married for many years, but they had never had a child. It was Xiao Ran's problem. She had been pregnant before, but she had habitual miscarriages. After that, he could not bear to see her suffer. Moreover, Meng Qingcheng was able to suppress it. Although his family had hinted at him, he still resolved it without batting an eyelid. He had asked Xiao Ran if he was willing to adopt a child. Regarding this, Xiao Ran was rather indifferent, so he didn't adopt a child. Instead, they were interested in Tang Yu's child. His love for Xiaoxin, Xiao Ran knew, and his dark and gloomy thoughts. He knew that Xiao Ran also knew a little, but she had never said anything. Since she didn't say anything, he restrained himself more and spent more time on her. Because he had always loved Xiao Ran, he didn't want her to be too sad. Xiao Ran led him to the guest room next to the master bedroom. He pushed the door open and turned on the light. Inside was a warm yellow princess bedroom, Xiaoxin's exclusive bedroom. It could be seen how much Xiaoxin was doted on in the Meng family. Meng Qingcheng put the doll on the bed. When he straightened up, he kissed Xiao Ran and panted, "This little guy is a little heavy. Maybe I'm getting old." Xiao Ran glanced at him. "CEO Meng also knows that you're getting old." After they got married, she still worked at Boyi. It was just that Tang Yu didn't really handle things, so she interacted more with Meng Qingcheng most of the time. However, they didn't get too close to each other in the company, and when they got home, she would occasionally call him CEO Meng with a straight face. When she called him that, Meng Qingcheng wanted to teach her a lesson. Chapter 1986. Xiao Ren also glanced at him and found that his eyes were a little burning. Her face was a little hot. Even though they had been married for many years, she was still a little shy about this kind of thing. Moreover, Xiaoxin was sleeping in the next room tonight. She thought that he was just having the heart but not the courage. Xiao Ran gently helped Cher wipe her little face and hands with a towel. Apart from the fact that Qingcheng doted on this child, she had a good relationship with Pei Qiqi. It was impossible for her not to dote on this child. It was just that Qingcheng was more or less looking after her child. She didn't have children of her own, and Xiaoxin would come to stay for a day or 2 from time to time. They were very close. Xiao Ran put down the towel, lowered her head, and kissed the little girl's forehead. She dimmed the lights and went out quietly. She closed the door and paused in front of the master bedroom before pushing the door in. Meng Qingcheng had already finished showering. He was only wearing a bathrobe and leaning against the headboard with a cigarette in his hand. When he saw Xiao Ran come in, he immediately put out the cigarette. Xiao Ran walked in slowly and looked at Meng Qingcheng with a faint smile. "She's asleep. What's going on?" Meng Qingcheng reached out and motioned for her to come over.
His voice was calm.
A group of children playing around. Xiao Ran made an "oh" sound and put her hand on his palm. She lay down with his strength and rested her head on Meng Qingcheng's shoulder. After a moment of silence, she said, "But Mu Yun, how did he agree to it?" When she said this, Meng Qingcheng smiled and looked at his wife sideways. His voice was unbelievably gentle. "You also think it's impossible, don't you?" Xiao Ren nestled comfortably on his shoulder and said in a low voice, "She's probably making a scene. Mu Yun wants to make her happy, but she's drunk tonight. I'm afraid she won't be like this again in the future." After she said this, Meng Qingcheng didn't respond for a long time, so Xiao Ran raised her head. Meng Qingcheng said slowly, "Mu Yun can only control her for a while. Xiaoxin has grown up. She can't be under his wing forever." Xiao Ran was silent. Xiaoxin's character was actually like Tang Xian. Qingcheng's worries were reasonable, and he followed his heart's desires. Even though she felt a stab of pain in her heart, how could she bicker with a little girl who had passed away? Furthermore, Tang Xian was much younger than her when she was alive. Yes, no matter what, she could not bicker with a child. She didn't make a sound and buried herself in Meng Qingqing's neck. He had drunk wine tonight, so his skin was hotter than usual and his pulse was faster as well. Mixed with the unique scent of a mature man, it was a little suffocating. Xiao Ran was a mature man's body smell. Xiao Ran was at Xiao Ran. And of her. Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran had ran. Meng Qingqing lowered his head and looked at his wife under the warm yellow light. He turned his body slightly and lowered his voice. What's the matter, Ran Ran? His feelings for her were very restrained, and he would only call her like that in the middle of the night. Xiao Ran quietly hugged his sturdy waist and rubbed his face against his chest. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Nothing, I just feel, she nibbled on his neck. It's so good to have you here. He was really, really good to her. Perhaps it was because he had used up all of his strength for Tang Xian, but he still couldn't make her stay. After that, even when he fell in love with her, his expression was faint, but she knew that he loved her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have the cheek to stay by his side even though she was infertile. Because he loved her. Chapter 1987. Xiao Ran had always been a very clear person, so she left everything to Meng Qingqing. As for her, she only needed to quietly accompany him as he slowly grew old. After more than 10 years of marriage, this man seemed to have slowly changed. In the past, Meng Qingqing could not be said to be a man who kept his chastity. Xiao Ran and he were both Tang Yu's left and right hands. It was impossible for her not to know his private affairs. After marriage, he was very restrained at first, just like a couple who had lived together for decades. They would only indulge on the weekends. However, in the past 2 years, he seemed to have changed. Usually, when he was in the mood, he did not restrain himself and fooled around as he pleased. She calculated that it was probably after his mother gave up on letting him divorce and remarry. Sometimes, Xiao Ran would secretly think that he was probably under a lot of pressure. Qingqing. She called his name softly. Meng Qingqing replied and reached out to stroke her long hair. Tonight, when he saw Xiao Ran with Xiaoxin in his arms, he had already planned to have her. However, after drinking a little, he was a little lazy and tired. Not all men would be beastly after drinking. The older Meng Qingqing was the kind of man who liked his wife to be more gentle and take the initiative after he was drunk. So, it could be said that he had been waiting for her to take the initiative. Between husband and wife, he never needed to hint, she would understand. And he was not in a hurry. The night was very long, his body temperature slowly rose. Xiao Ran reached out to poke him, then lifted her body and kissed his chin. He also pressed the back of her head, and at the same time he pulled her up a little. One of his large palms landed on her waist and slowly touched it. It was lingering and gentle, and slowly, it made all the love jades in her body sink together. Except for the last few minutes of roughness, he was considered gentle and considerate before Xiao Ran lay in his arms. Both of them were covered in sweat, tired and satisfied. He still did not want to leave her, so he stopped her from leaving. Meng Qingqing's voice was hoarse. Lie down for a while more. I want to wash and then go see Xiaoxin. She hugged him tightly and said softly. Meng Qingqing lowered his head and kissed his wife. I'll carry you to the bathroom later. Let's go and see her together. Xiao Ran couldn't help but look up at him with a complicated expression. She was his wife. How could he not know what she was thinking? Meng Qingqing hugged her even tighter. His face was close to hers, and his voice was low. Ran, the one I love now is you, not anyone else. Even if he had loved someone else, that was in the past. As for Ran, she was really by his side. What he needed was this genuine love. Ran. Meng Qingqing kissed her lips lightly, feeling a little emotional. She had never given birth to a child, and she had been pampered all these years. Her whole body was soft and tender. He was in the prime of his life, so once was not enough. However, both of them were sweating, and she refused to do it again. Meng Qingcheng could only carry her to the bathroom and coax her to do it twice more. This time, not only was she so satisfied that she didn't want to move a finger, but Meng Qingcheng was also a little exhausted. After carrying her to the bedroom, he kissed her eyelids and said in a low voice, "I'll go, you sleep first." He was about to straighten up when Xiao Ran suddenly grabbed one of his fingers. Her voice was very low. "Qingcheng." Chapter 1988. She looked at him. They were very close, so close that she could see the reflection in his eyes and his warmth. She was really tired and sleepy. She softly responded with a hum and hugged his neck. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Come back soon." Meng Qingqing kissed her and tucked her in. Although Xiao Ran closed his eyes, she could feel him taking the cigarettes and lighter from the bedside table. She didn't say anything, closed her eyes gently, and fell asleep after a while. Meng Qingqing quietly looked at her for a while and quietly went out. He walked to the bedroom next door and tucked Xiaoxin in. She was a girl after all, and Xiao Ran knew that he would cover her in the middle of the night, so he changed her into pajamas so that she wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Meng Qingqing understood Xiao Ran's thoughtfulness and trust, and he felt sorry for her. Ran was a good woman. Although life with her was as ordinary as water, when one was middle-aged, didn't they need this kind of peace? In fact, it wasn't all ordinary. His wife would occasionally surprise him. She didn't say it, but he could feel it from the style of her pajamas. Occasionally, on special days, she would wear sexy pajamas with a nightgown on the outside. Only he, as her husband, knew about her beauty. Meng Qingqing stood in the hallway and smoked a few cigarettes. Today was the day Tang Xian left. She brought Xiaoxin back and slept next to them like she was their child. Meng Qingqing reached out his hand and covered his face after so many years. He had struggled in his heart and had many dark thoughts, but they were always comforted by Xiao Ran's gentleness. Meng Qingqing smoked a few cigarettes and let the dark thoughts go. When he returned to the bedroom, he went to the bathroom to brush his teeth. Because Xiao Ran didn't like the smell of cigarettes, she couldn't let go when he kissed her with the smell of cigarettes. After all, he still had some teasing thoughts. When he lay down next to her, he pulled her into his arms. He kissed her lips and deliberately woke her up in the dim light. Xiao Ran opened his eyes. Then, unable to bear it, he hugged his shoulder and gasped, "Qingqing." She had already done it 3 times tonight. Normally, he would have let her go. It wasn't the weekend, there was no reason for him to indulge like this. Meng Qingqing's forehead was covered with sweat. As he moved, drops of sweat dripped down, scalding her so much that she moaned softly. Ran, he whispered into her ear, "Actually, you've always known that I love you, right?" Xiao Ran's body tensed up, and he looked dazed. Only after a while did he come back to his senses. He closed his eyes and replied softly. As for the man lying on top of her, he was probably a little beastly tonight. He didn't care about anything and kept tormenting her until late into the night. He didn't sleep much. When he woke up, he would press her down. When he was tired, he would sleep for a while and then come again. It was as though he wanted to break through the limits of his physical strength, but at the same time, it was as though he had gone crazy. That night, even though Xiao Ran's throat was sore, he didn't let her go. When dawn came, although she was exhausted, she finally remembered the reason why he was so crazy. She hugged him and whispered those 3 words in his ear. At that time, Meng Qingqing tensed up and hugged her tightly. Ran. She had forgotten that ever since they were married for 2 years and did not have a child, she was actually cold towards him. Chapter 1989. Tonight, although it was a little childish, it could be considered that he had vented his anger. It could also be considered that he had completely forgotten about the past. What he truly grasped was happiness. Meng Qingqing looked at the tear stains under his wife's eyes and the hickeys on her shoulder with great delight. He thought to himself a little smugly that she had been living comfortably all these years. He had always treated her gently in bed, as if he hadn't been willing to use any of those underhanded methods on her. He had played a lot in the past, but Xiao Ran was such a serious woman, so he could not do it when he looked at her. Meng Qingqing touched his forehead and chuckled softly. He was a middle-aged man, but he had become impulsive. He did not sleep much last night, but he was still in good spirits, just that he had overdone it. After getting up and tidying up, he kissed her again and went downstairs. Cher was already sitting in the dining room downstairs. She had to go to school in a while. Meng Qingqing sat down and asked the servants to bring some tonics over. He had become better at taking care of his health in the past 2 years. There was no other way. He was too busy with work, and his private affairs were so unrestrained. He had to take some tonics. Cher looked at him and coughed softly. "And Xiao hasn't woken up yet?" The little girl coughed again. "When I came down, I heard some movements inside, so I didn't call you uncle." Meng Qingqing almost swallowed the tonics. He looked at Cher and blushed. "What did you hear?" Cher held her chin and spoke to Meng Qingqing impolitely. "It's the sound from the TV." Meng Qingqing's face was a little green, and he could not drink the tonics in his hand. Didn't Mu Yun say that Xiaoxin was very innocent and that she did not understand these things? Cher still looked at him. "Uncle Meng, why don't you drink it? You can't give Aunt Xiao happiness if you are not in good health." She blinked, and her eyes suddenly seemed to be filled with little stars. Meng Qingqing was a little stunned for a moment. He could not tell whether the person in front of him was Cher or Tang Xian. He was stunned for a moment before he came back to his senses. He was a little annoyed. "I'll throw you to your brother later. Let's see if I can still save you when he teaches you a lesson in the future." Cher immediately praised Uncle Meng for his wisdom and bravery. Meng Qingqing ruffled her fluffy hair and suddenly said, "This is very good. In the future, you must also do this in front of Mu Yun." He could tell from the start that there was something wrong with the relationship between Mu Yun and Schweber. One was too strong, the other was too weak. Right now, everything seemed harmonious, but Cher would eventually grow up. It wasn't fair for Mu Yun to treat her like this. Being pampered and held in the palm of an outstanding man was a very happy thing, but being pampered too much and losing freedom was not a happy thing. Cher wasn't stupid. She was just used to being by Mu Yun's side and enjoying his care. After listening to Meng Qingqing's words, Cher lowered her little head and said in a very low voice, "I drank last night and he came back." Her eyes were a little watery. "Will he not allow me to go out again?"
"He will."
Meng Qingqing sighed. "Let him do as he pleases for now." Sometimes, others could not do anything about it because Mu Yun had already set a prison for himself 10 years ago. It was not Cher who was in prison, but Mu Yun himself. The one who had real problems in terms of personality, character was never Cher but Mu Yun. Chapter 1990. She smiled and suddenly asked, "In your heart, do you like Mu Yun?" Cher looked at Meng Qingqing in bewilderment and called out to him helplessly. No one had ever asked her such a question. She rarely asked herself if she liked him. After a long time, she said softly, "I like my brother." She really liked him, because she couldn't imagine what it would be like without him one day. "Aren't you dependent on him?" Meng Qingqing asked casually. Cher shook her head and said softly, "He is very important to me." "That's good." Meng Qingqing smiled and stood up. "I'll send you to school." He didn't intend to go to work today. He would come back to accompany Xiao Ran later. He had already helped her apply for leave. Cher grunted in acknowledgement. But no one expected that the person standing at the door when they walked out of the villa was Yi Muyun. His young and handsome face looked a little tired. He was wearing a formal suit, and it was obvious that he was in a hurry. Meng Qingqing looked at him for a long time, then turned to look at Cher and sighed. Mu Yun drives slowly. "I will, Uncle Meng." Yi Muyun's tone was a little indifferent. He then stretched out his hand to Cher. "Come, I'll send you to school." Cher looked at him. pursed her lips, and walked over slowly. Then, her little head was pressed on his shoulder. Yi Muyun's voice sounded a little depressed. All right, let's go. Cher couldn't help but turn her head and look at Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing smiled. Don't forget what you said just now. Cher's heart skipped a beat. She looked up at Yi Muyun and pursed her lips. Yi Muyun's attitude was somewhat indecipherable. He did not get angry at her and directly brought her to the car. The car started at a high speed, and her heart was pounding. After a while, she said with difficulty, I'm sorry. Why are you saying sorry? Yi Muyun steered the steering wheel with one hand and took the cigarette box with the other. He took out a cigarette and put it to his lips, taking a puff with practiced ease. He rarely smoked in front of her, and he rarely let her inhale secondhand smoke. If it was in the past, she would definitely act coquettishly and say that it was suffocating, but she didn't dare to now. Although his expression was normal, she could feel that a storm was brewing. After all, they had grown up together. She knew a little about his temper. Cher had been walking cautiously, not daring to make a sound. But 10 minutes later, she realized that this wasn't the way to school, but the airport. Her face was pale as she turned to look at his indifferent face. Where are we going? The airport. He held the cigarette in one hand and placed it on the car window. I'll take you to New York. Even though Cher knew that he would be angry and that she wouldn't have a good life after coming back, she had thought about it. If he wanted to hit her, she would let him. But going to New York, did that mean that he would be even stricter with her in the future? Did that mean that he would bring her along wherever he went? She was dazed for a moment, then said slowly, I don't want to go to New York. She wasn't against being with him, but now wasn't the time. He didn't know this sharp pain at all. It was like a child who had done something wrong and then was stripped of all her freedom, all her rights, and could no longer be trusted by the adults. It was trust. Did he trust her? Trust that she had never wanted to be with someone else. Chapter 1991. At that moment, many thoughts flashed through Cher's mind. She suddenly felt that she didn't want to live like this anymore. She didn't want to continue living like this. It wasn't that she hadn't heard others say that she was a useless person, that she had always been like a little idiot, and that she was nothing other than Yi Muyun. She suddenly couldn't take it anymore and mustered her courage to resist. I don't want to go to New York. I want to stay in B City. Yi Muyun had already extinguished the cigarette in his hand. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and his expression was extremely ugly. Because of Zhou Chongguang's? Cher's eyes widened. What did you say? Yi Muyun tossed her a phone and said angrily, Look at it yourself. Cher looked at him. Her fingers slowly reached out and picked up the phone to take a look. Then, her face turned pale. They were all photos of her and Zhou Chongguang together. You sent someone to follow me? Her breathing was a little painful as she said that. Then, she said softly, I'm not with him. This was the first time that they were having an adult conversation. Yi Muyun's knuckles were almost white as he clenched his teeth. Of course I know that you guys aren't together. He paused for a moment. If you were with him, he would have disappeared from this world by now. Cher's heart ached as she looked at him in disbelief. This was the first time that she felt his viciousness. He didn't even bother to hide it from her. He probably couldn't be bothered to hide it anymore. Actually, he had always been like this, ruthless. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to climb to such a position in such a short time. But in front of her, he would always be that cold and domineering brother. You're unreasonable. After a long time, she finally squeezed out a sentence with tears in her eyes. Yi Muyun's lips curled into a cold smirk. He didn't care about what she said anymore. Cher's chest heaved up and down as her temper rose. I don't want to go to New York. I want to go to school. You will follow me from now on. His voice was calm as though he had already decided on it. When you're not in school, I will hire a tutor to teach you. Cher's blood froze. She knew all too well what this meant. In the future, she would be under house arrest. What about the future? Her voice was a little absent-minded. In the future, do I have to follow you like this for the rest of my life? Do I have to go wherever you go? Yes. He answered her without the slightest hesitation. Cher's voice suddenly turned sharp. I don't want to.
I don't want this. I don't want this.
Yi Muyun, do you hear me? This was the first time in her life that she had called him by his full name. Yi Muyun's face stiffened, and then became even colder. You have to take it even if you don't want it. Perhaps it was because of her temper, or perhaps it was because she blurted out, I don't want you anymore. Do you hear me? The air seemed to have solidified. Yi Muyun's knuckles looked as if they were showing white bones. His face was pale, but he didn't make a sound, nor did he get angry at her. After Cher said that, she felt a little regretful. Her eyes were a little red, and there were tears in them. However, she couldn't bring herself to apologize. In the end, she could only turn her head stubbornly and look out of the window. The expensive sports car drove for more than an hour and arrived at the airport of B-City. Yi Muyun stopped the car and unbuckled his seatbelt. He said indifferently, Get out. Cher refused. She sat there and said in a dull voice, I'm not getting out. Chapter 1992. Since he wanted an explanation, she could explain it to him. Everyone went out for a meal, and I took his bike. That's all. However, her explanation was futile. Yi Muyun looked at her. I've made up my mind. He did not want to talk about anything between her and Zhou Chengguang. That Zhou Chengguang liked her, and she did not know how to avoid it. Instead, she took his bike. In her heart, she felt that there was nothing wrong with that. But in Yi Muyun's case, he couldn't get past her. It was just that he did not want to say anything that would hurt her, and chose not to say it. Instead, he chose to do it. In the future, she would no longer have a chance to interact with Zhou Chengguang. He said slowly, I'll arrange for Gu Zhe's sister, Gu Mei, to be in the same faculty and class with you. After he said that, Cher was shocked. This was a blatant surveillance. She was no different from a prisoner. As though she had lost her voice, she took in a deep breath and looked at him. After a long time, Cher asked softly, Are you sure you want to do this? This time around, Yi Muyun did not reply her and got off the bike. He walked to her side and opened the door. Cher refused to get off the bike, so he bent down to unbuckle her seatbelt. I don't want to, she screamed as he carried her up horizontally. Punching and kicking didn't work. She could only scream desperately and bite his shoulder, biting it hard. She started to cry. Brother, I don't want to do this. She knew that he would be angry after seeing those photos. She could apologize. She really did not like Zhou Chengguang. She was probably too happy that she was free like a bird that was released. She was just happy because Zhou Chengguang did not express anything to her. She thought that there was nothing shameful and that she did not like anyone else. But why was her brother treating her like this? She had never begged him so humbly before. I'll get the chauffeur to pick me up every day. I won't go out or eat with anyone else. I'll be good, all right? She cried like a little kitten and was out of breath in his arms. Yi Muyun's face was stiff, and he did not look good. After all, he had worked in New York for a day before flying back to B-City. Now he was flying back to New York again. He had not slept for nearly 30 hours. Now that she was in such a mess, the anger in his heart grew. Ignoring her little feelings, he directly pressed her down and carried her to the private plane. Gu Zhe waited in the private jet. Looking at the couple, he sighed in his heart. Boss was really deeply affectionate. But Cher had been protected by him to this extent. Could she understand his love? The private plane took off immediately. Amidst the rumbling sound, Cher was a little sluggish. She sat on the spacious sofa and didn't come back to her senses for a long time. Suddenly, she looked at Yi Muyun, who was already handling official business, and said blankly, What am I? Was she his prisoner? Did it belong to him? He could make all the decisions for her and take it for granted, as though she was born to him. But he wouldn't even listen to a single explanation. Did he like her, love her, or treat her as a little pet? Cher started to feel that she was a human, and not his pet. She had seen her parents together, Uncle Meng and Auntie Xiao together, and Auntie Pei Huan and Uncle Ken together. None of them got along like her and her brother. They wouldn't control the person they liked like this. Only she couldn't do anything. Chapter 1993. Cher murmured, "I don't want to go to New York." She looked at him and said in a hoarse voice, "I don't want to go to New York. Do you hear me?" Yi Muyun was discussing business with Gu Zhe. He was already a little tired and rubbed his eyebrows. "Cher, stop it." He raised his hand and called Gu Mei over. "Take her to the bedroom to rest and give her a glass of milk." When he said milk, his tone became heavier. Gu Mei's heart skipped a beat, and she asked hesitantly, "Mr. Yi?" "Let her sleep." Yi Muyun's tone was indifferent. From their conversation, Cher guessed that he was going to give her sleeping pills. Her face turned pale. "Yi Muyun, I don't want." She had said no too many times today. And he seemed to have lost his patience. He raised his hand and asked someone to bring the milk over to feed her. She refused and spilled the milk all over his expensive trousers. However, he didn't even blink and said coldly, "Bring another cup over." Cher screamed and struggled. "I don't want to drink it. I don't want to sleep." She even scolded him harshly and even said some things that she herself didn't know. At this moment, she seemed to have gone crazy and wanted to go against him. Yes, she didn't want to listen to him. Why should she listen to him? He was too hateful. However, her waist was held by him. He held her tightly, not giving her a chance to struggle. The second glass of milk was soon brought over. Yi Muyun held her easily with one hand and held the glass of milk with the other. He looked at her indifferently. "Do you want to drink it yourself, or do you want me to do it?" "I don't want to drink it." Cher was tired from struggling. Her ponytail was loose, and her forehead was covered in sweat. Her eyes were a little dazed, and she was panting slightly in the crook of his arm. He was too strong, and she was too weak. That glass of milk was fed by him mouthful by mouthful. Yi Muyun's movements were slow and unhurried, but they were filled with ruthlessness. Gu Zhe and Gu Mei, who were watching from the side, felt a chill in their hearts. They wanted to say something, but they didn't dare to. After feeding her a glass of milk, Cher had already fallen asleep. Her eyelids were slightly swollen and pink from crying, and there were 2 drops of tears on her long eyelashes. She looked obedient and cute. But in the future, it would be hard for her to be obedient. Yi Muyun lowered his head and looked at her silently for a long time. He got up and carried her to the bedroom and gently put her down. She lay perfectly soft beside him on the bed, but something was different. "Should I not have agreed to let you go in the first place?" He bent one leg and half knelt beside her. His slender and beautiful fingers gently caressed her little face, his voice extremely hoarse. But she could not hear him. Her heart was full of indignation, and she could not feel his pain. His pain, his happiness she never knew. She did not know how important she was to him. She did not know how angry he was when he saw those photos. His face was slightly cold. She did not need to know. She only needed to stay in his arms peacefully. That was enough. Outside, Gu Mei looked at Gu Zhe and said softly, "Brother, don't you think Mr. Ye's love is too stubborn?" Gu Zhe smiled faintly and looked at Gu Mei. "Maybe, but they will be together." Because they liked each other. Gu Mei was a few years younger than Gu Zhe and was a genius. She was about the same age as Yi Muyun and was now a top talent under Yi Muyun. But no one in Boyi knew the meaning of Gu Mei's existence, because she did nothing but follow beside Yi Muyun. Chapter 1994. She didn't agree with Gu Zhe. "Brother, I can't stand it if a man treats me like this." Gu Zhe bent his well-defined fingers and knocked on his sister's head. He smiled. "That's why they're suitable." With Yi Muyun's personality, he didn't need a capable wife. What he wanted was a gentle little person who could make him happy. And Shui was the most suitable person for him. The friction now was only because they were too young and hadn't found a way to get along. Perhaps Gu Mei was right. Mystery's love was too stubborn. As the siblings were talking, Yi Muyun walked out, looking slightly tired. He sat on the sofa and looked at Gu Zhe. Bring the documents over. Gu Zhe hesitated. Mr. Yi, do you want to take a break? No need. Yi Muyun didn't have any expression on his face. He sat down and discussed business with Gu Zhe. Gu Mei thought to herself, cold-blooded devil. Could it be that Cher was ignoring him and not following him? She didn't have much contact with Cher before, but there would be in the future. She would have to accompany the genius girl in her studies. She had been poached over by Yi Muyun to work on high-end technology. Now, she was wasting her talent. Gu Mei very naturally explained to herself that it was because she was young and cute, and that she was suitable to accompany the younger and prettier cutie, Cher. Gu Mei's self-esteem was satisfied with this thought. Yi Muyun and Gu Zhe had been working. Occasionally, he would use the satellite phone to talk to the United States. This time back to City B, his work rhythm was all messed up and his body was at its limit. When he arrived in New York, he still couldn't rest. There was an important meeting waiting for him. He didn't think it was very tiring. The most tiring thing was his little girl. She was so fierce now. Just thinking about it made his head hurt. Half an hour before the plane landed, he finished his work and got up to go to the bedroom. Gu Zhe heaved a sigh of relief. Mr. Yi didn't care about his life, but he was also fucked to death. At this moment, he could already predict how miserable it would be later. Gu Mei threw a sympathetic look at him. The elder brother glanced at her and said, "Pack up. The plane has begun to descend." Gu Mei nodded. Yi Muyun opened the door and found that Cher had woken up. She was leaning against the headboard of the bed. She looked weak and beautiful because she was in a daze. She looked to the side, and it was impossible to tell what she was thinking. "We're going to land in a while. Are you hungry?" He walked in and sat beside her, sighing. "Will you listen to me?" She didn't make a sound. He slowly turned her little face over and placed it on his shoulder. "I'll get someone to send some food over." She was still silent. After he pressed the intercom to get someone to send a simple meal, she then said in a low voice, "Am I going to live like this for the rest of my life?" His heart skipped a beat. Shue lifted her little face from his shoulder. Her gaze was unfamiliar to him. "Am I not allowed to say a single word to anyone? Do I have to stay in the place you've marked out for me every day? Do I only have you in my world, Yi Muyun? Am I right?" His heart trembled slightly. At this moment, who said that his Cher was stupid? She was very smart. The little girl had grown up and knew how to resist. Chapter 1995. Cher had always been a naive and innocent girl in front of him, but that didn't mean that she didn't know anything. Her eyes searched for his, and then she stared into his eyes and asked very slowly, "How many children should we have?" Yi Muyun's fingers loosened slightly. He lowered his head and pressed his forehead against hers. His voice was gentle as he said, "Let's have 2. It's best if it's a boy and a girl." With that said, the little body in his arms stiffened. Cher laughed lightly. "Look, you've even thought about this." She slowly withdrew from his arms, her face as pale as snow. "Yi Muyun, my life is already yours, isn't it?" He frowned. His hand that was hanging in the air dropped. He was a little frustrated and wanted to smoke, but he couldn't. Finally, he stood up and stood by the window, looking at the clouds outside. Once, she was like a cloud in the sky to him. She was so young and so was he. She came from a good family, and her parents loved each other. Back then, he only had a broken life. She had no idea how much effort he had put in, and how much he had walked to be able to stand by her side so naturally. He and her has always been he looked up to her. But she didn't know. He didn't intend to let her know in the future. Yi Muyun stood there for a long time before he said in a hoarse voice, "I thought that our lives belonged to each other." She said that her world needed more excitement, but there was no one else in his world, only her. Ever since he came to the Tang family, she was the only one in his world. After Yi Muyun said that, He didn't say anything else. He wasn't someone who was good at being submissive. Moreover, he had always been the one giving orders in front of her. Cher bit her lip and didn't say a word. She hugged her knees and lowered her eyes. Outside the door, Gume came in with a simple meal. Seeing the situation, she grabbed her long curly hair and said uncomfortably, "I'm here to deliver the food. The plane will land in 20 minutes. She reminded them out of goodwill. If they were going to quarrel, it was better to have some dignity when they were outside. Cher looked up at Gume. She knew Gume, and Gume would follow her in the future. Towards this, she had an indescribable resistance in her heart. It was not that she hated Gume, but she hated Yi Muyun's arrangements. She didn't say anything. Yi Muyun stood by the window and said calmly, "Put it down." Gume was sensible. She immediately put down the food and ran out. Guze looked at her, and she mouthed, "Quarreled." In the bedroom, Yi Muyun suppressed his anger. He walked to the bed and sat down. He picked up the food box with one hand and said, "Eat." Shui Er didn't move, so he scooped up some food and brought it to her lips. "If you don't eat, you'll have to wait for 24 hours before you can eat again."
Are you sure you can wait that long?
Cher wanted to be unyielding and not eat, but she thought that she would starve to death if she didn't eat for 24 hours. In the end, she still ate without a backbone. Yi Muyun looked at her with a burning gaze and continued to feed her. Before the plane landed, she ate everything after eating. She calmed down a little. Kneeling on the bed, she looked up at him and said softly, "Brother, I'll take the chauffeur's car from now on. I'll go home on time from school, okay?" She even took the initiative to hug his waist and put her face on his chest, begging in a small voice, "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.